Okay.
All right, so Robinson.
Yes, Robinson. So
Um,
let's do you remember where we left off? Or I should
well,
recap, but go
in
ahead.
general, yeah. So there's a chance that Richard Robinson participated in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. We know that he was there in the days before,
Mhm.
doing something. We know that after the massacre, he spoke very little of it.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, there's no records, nothing written down, no journal entries or anything where he wrote about the experiences.
He had to go testify, but other than that,
That's the only thing, yeah,
yeah,
was that we know, what was it, 2 decades later?
yeah, 20 years later. So
Yeah,
it was,
he was subpoenaed to come and testify.
yeah.
And we, yeah, we thought about the idea that there might be a record of his testimony somewhere. Um, and that's it. That I think that's what we talked about.
Yep.
So, are we going back to the shortly after the massacre? Like, where's our starting point?
Yeah, so I would say definitely. I mean, we can't start in the 1870s because we
Hmm.
haven't even talked about him marrying Marianne yet or anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So we need to go back to Pinto, which we
That's
chatted about. Doesn't
yeah, the
exist
town
anymore.
where he was sort of the de facto mayor.
Yep.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, at this point he's only 26.
yeah.
So there's a lot of life left. I think we'll still be able to finish talking about his story today because like these major things, like up to this point, we talked about them coming from England and going to
Mm.
Nauvoo and then crossing the plains. And then he went to the gold fields in California. And then he lived in the community that was the closest to the Mountain Meadows when the massacre happened in southern Utah. So there have been these major events and pretty much like he passes away, I believe in his early 70s, maybe. I might correct myself here in a couple minutes. Um, so we have about half of a century of his history, but his life does settle down into more of a routine, although there are definitely things I want to touch on, especially, and for me, this takes us all the way back to the very first episode, as we've been talking about this family, when, we started talking about Marianne Eccles, who is our third great grandmother. She is his second wife. And for me, the importance of telling the entire, we're calling this, this season, I guess we're calling it the Robinson family, but for me, it was all about Marianne's story.
Mm.
And we started with
Mm.
her and kind of how his family and his life and his choices ended up affecting her. And when we're done with his story, I do want to touch on a couple of tangential, interesting Robinson details about the broader Robinson family. But when it comes to him, yeah, I think we should be able to get through his story today. So yeah, so we are back in Pinto. He is 26 years old. So give me a couple minutes. Let me see exactly where I want to start. Okay, some of this we already touched on in regard to, okay, and I do want to touch on, so something that cousin Dennis said last time that we don't particularly feel comfortable with. He says, it is unlikely that Richard would have stayed in the area or continued in his assignments as leader had he any personal involvement in the massacre. We don't agree. There were a lot of people that did stay in the area that had participated. That to us, we talked about that the power of discernment last time in regard to he never would have been called to be a bishop after that or had church leadership after that if he had been guilty of anything
Yeah.
terrible. And we flat out 100% disagree.
Yeah. I mean, we know, yeah, so many historical examples of people being guilty of pretty terrible things and still getting called to, callings in the church, into the bishopric, into high levels in the church. So now, Does Cousin Dennis offer any justification for his claim?
It is just that he was called as a church leader. Like that's it. Like
Yeah. Right,
he
but
doesn't,
he makes the claim that it's unlikely that he would have stayed in the area had he been involved. Does he
yeah,
offer any reason that that's true?
because he got called as a bishop. That's it. That's what I'm trying to get at. Like
Okay.
so certain that
Yeah.
power of discernment is real that
Well,
Richard never would have he never like he would have been so ashamed. He never would have continued to show his face. He would not have been called as a because there were people who did leave. Eventually that's just it. They didn't some of them left right away, but some of them stayed and then left later, but a lot of them just stayed. So it isn't actually consistent with the historical record. There are too many people who participated in Mountain Meadows Massacre that stayed right in that area after it happened
yeah.
for that claim to be valid.
And I'm not following his logic at all. And his logic seems to be like some really serious begging the question. He's saying that well he seems to be operating under the assumption that the massacre was something that everyone involved immediately recognized was a bad thing. But there's no reason to think that's what they thought.
Some did, others defended themselves to the day they
Hmm.
died. Either
Yeah.
denied it or any involvement that they had was justified.
Yeah. Well, and if some of them believed that this really was, a command from the church authorities, then there's no reason they would think
Yeah.
that they had done anything wrong.
Yep.
I mean, Mormons were already entirely used to operating under the mindset that it's what the prophet says that matters, not what the law says that matters.
Yep.
So, yeah. I mean, I guess the people, I mean, maybe this is a broad assumption on my part. I guess the people who realized that they had done something wrong are just the people who didn't have enough faith in the prophet or enough faith in the church or enough faith in the power of the
I
priesthood.
think everyone was different.
Hmm.
I think John D. Lee was an absolutely horrendous human being,
Mm.
and he was just a terrible human being.
Yeah.
He just
Yeah.
was. There were
Right.
there are people who years later wrote to um church leaders confessing and like I cannot live with this guilt.
Hmm.
Um a kid named George Spencer was his name, and he wrote a letter, and it was several years later. I want to say maybe even 10 years later. Like it was a long time later.
Hmm.
So racked with the nightmares, the just the absolute horror of what he had participated in that he
Hmm.
was trying to find some kind of mental, emotional, spiritual relief and wrote a
Hmm.
letter confessing what he had done.
Yeah.
And there are other people who just went on with their lives,
Hmm.
and other people who went there just kind of the regular militiamen, just regular folks, just nobody in authority, but pretty much everybody had to be in the militia back then,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, that showed up that were being told, come to the meadows, we need your help burying some bodies because they knew that there had been a conflict
Hmm.
before, like, a couple days earlier. And they show up to discover, nope, we're not here to bury bodies. And some of them, there was one guy showed up to bury bodies. All he brought was a shovel,
Yeah.
being ordered as a member of the militia. And he gets screamed at, like, what the hell are you doing? Where's your
Yeah.
weapon? I thought
Yeah.
we were burying bodies. Get out
Hmm.
of here. And so he leaves because he doesn't have a weapon. So he's to the commander. He leaves and goes home. He doesn't end up participating in the
Yeah.
massacre, but other people who showed up with shovels and happened to have a weapon with them at the same time, because everybody walked around with weapons
Yeah.
back then, right?
Yeah.
Show up with a shovel and a weapon. What are you doing? Put that shovel down.
Hmm.
Load your weapon,
Wow.
whatever. Like, and they end up
Wow.
participating in the massacre, having no idea why they are being called there.
Yeah.
And there are some stories, and they do believe that they're true, that there are some people who, when the massacre began, they refused to shoot the person standing right in front of them
Mm.
and were yelled and screamed at by the people around them, and then somebody else killed their person that they were
Yeah. Yeah.
and they were called cowards, and but
Sure.
they were
Sure.
so horrified in the moment that that's what they were being asked to do, and they couldn't
Hmm.
bring themselves to pull the trigger. which was 100% the right thing to do. But at that time, in that moment, they were like very much made to feel like they were betraying their people. They were
Yeah.
and that they were weak and they were chickens and they were, whatever else.
Sure. Sure.
So everybody had a different experience.
Right.
So we can't really blanket it, but there are plenty of people who, like some of them, they talk about how they were like monsters out there,
Yeah.
just bloodthirsty and
Yeah.
relentless. It didn't matter if it was a man, woman, or child standing in front of them.
Hmm.
Yes, they saved 17 children, all of them under, I think it was under maybe the age of 6. They talk, there's some debate there, but I've heard different things. But there were plenty of children under the age of 8, 6, whatever it was, that were killed. It's not
Yeah.
like they systematically saved all the children under a certain age. It just so happened that if there was a child still living, oh, and they're young enough, we can let them live.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's honestly what it makes me think of is that those were the children who successfully hid. And once the firing stopped and, the tension and the chaos died down, they're just the kids who happen to still be alive. So it's not
And
like they systematically saved the children who happen not to be in the line of fire.
there were countless toddlers that were in their mother's arms and were killed along with their
Yeah,
mother.
yeah.
But not, yes, some of those children were the ones that hid. Some of the kids later talked about trying to pull arrows out of their mother's back,
Hmm.
trying to wake up their paw. Paw, wake
Yeah,
up, wake up.
yeah,
So they weren't hiding. They just
yeah.
happened to not die.
They just happen to not die.
And so they were
Yeah. No,
acting.
that in no way does that qualify as saving the children. So, well, this makes me think of a couple of things. John D. Lee, if we are to blame him for all of it, maybe he was that horrendous of a man. Maybe he was that despotic in that situation.
He's
And he
vicious.
was screaming and shouting and shaming, the people who showed up
Yep.
and really making sure that everybody kowtowed to his will. If that is what happened and the massacre really was his doing, well, I mean, what does this say about Brigham Young's power of discernment? He clearly did not know what kind of man he had working at his right hand.
He knew exactly what
He
kind
knew
of,
exactly what kind of man he was.
yeah.
And I mean, I know a lot of religious people nowadays are using tons and tons of justifications for shitty, shitty men being God's chosen. Um, and so I guess I just have to chalk it up to that's how religious people think. It's just in-group bias. Doesn't matter how shitty the person is. If he's our shitty guy, then he's our shitty guy. And we will, be behind him. So maybe that was it, but I just don't buy it. There's plenty of other reasons why we know Brigham Young was bloodthirsty. And so the notion that he ordered it is still very believable, even if historically that's harder to
True.
verify.
Quick side note, and I forgot to tell you this. This past week, I ended up listening to Will Bagley's book.
Hmm.
He was the historian that does believe that Brigham Young. Now, I actually have not finished it, so
Yeah. Yeah.
this next thing that I say, I am open to feedback from people because it may be that it's not exactly spot on. But what I gathered from how far I got was that Brigham Young was so expert at communicating in such a way that told his, I don't know,
Hmm.
men exactly what to do without
Yep.
saying it.
Sure.
And there is a line in that letter that the writer, he rode super fast all the way up to Salt Lake, got Brigham Young's response, hurried back down to southern Utah, handed it to uh, Isaac Haight, who sat down in the dirt and sobbed, right?
Hmm.
It's too late. It's too late. It's too late. There's a line in that letter that says something like, let the Indians do what they will, but blah blah blah, don't harm the immigrants. And what Will Bagley asserts, from what my impression was, what he asserts is that was Brigham Young communicating. Wipe them out, just make sure it looks like it was the Indians.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's how he communicated. And then other historians are saying, but that's not what he said. Why, how can you
Yeah.
think you have a right to like
Yeah.
read into what his words are? And Will Bagley's like, but that's how he always communicated with people. That
Yeah.
is, he was saying,
Sure.
he was giving permission. He was just like plausible deniability.
Yeah.
And so that's where the rift is.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I guess it comes down to the character of
Yeah.
Brigham, like
Yeah.
who you think Brigham Young was.
Well,
So,
how many mafia cases came down to, you know, exactly that style of communication, right? Where the mafia don says it would be unfortunate if Council Member Jones met an accident,
yeah,
right? And that is absolutely a dictate
yeah,
to a henchman to go do something, right? But it's phrased in such a way so as to, it's to make it easy for lawyers
argue.
to argue about, to defend.
And there were, I don't know if you'd call it slang, there were phrases that they would use uh, that was murder, that was,
Mhm. Sure.
killing someone
Hmm.
that wasn't, those weren't the words that you were
Yeah.
using. One of them
Yeah.
was, he's gone to California, meaning
Hmm.
he's been killed.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
could just be like, oh, he's gone to California. And
Yeah.
so, oh yeah, they because so many people did go through there and go to
Sure.
California.
Yeah.
But that became code between people who knew, who were in the
Hmm.
know
Hmm.
that so and so has been killed.
Yeah.
There were phrases like, when somebody would say he put those people down,
Hmm.
he killed them. That's
Yeah.
what that phrase
Sure.
means.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was a kid, when you put somebody down, you insulted them.
Yeah. Right.
You
Right.
know.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, yeah, we can think of instances in cowboy movies, where the gunslingers are threatening each other, I will put you down, right? I mean, we've encountered that kind of language, and yeah, if we're thinking of idioms, how many idioms are poetic language for dying or killing? I mean, think of how weird the phrase is, like we offed him.
yeah,
How weird that phrase is, right? Using a preposition off as a verb in the past tense. And if you were to use this for anybody who it doesn't know the context, they would be utterly confused by it. And yet, so, they would have used phrases for things
yeah.
that to us seems like completely innocuous language. And we wouldn't even notice it when we read it.
Right. And that's why Will Bagley says that phrase, let the Indians do what they will.
Yeah.
He believes just with,
Hmm.
well, and he's passed away, but he believed with absolute
Yeah.
certainty that Brigham Young was
Mm.
communicating to them, make sure it looks like the Indians did it.
Yeah. Well, even nowadays, the phrase "do what you will" feels sinister, right? So, yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean, again, this sounds like just fertile ground for apologetics,
Yeah.
rather than doing what historians need to do, which is to assess the probability that events mean something.
Yeah.
um, the probability, and this is what it came back down to for me years and years ago when I first learned about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Given how controlling Mormon prophets are, and given how willing Mormons are to obey their prophets, the likelihood that Brigham Young was completely hands off with this is essentially zero. The likelihood that people were obeying his orders when they did it is very high, because
And
that's how Mormons were.
yes, and here's the thing. I don't know whether or not he knew that this specific tr immigrant train was in this specific location,
Mhm.
but he had been communicating
Yeah.
upwards of a year to raid immigrant companies for cattle.
Hmm.
When people, a couple people here or there died as a consequence, like it was not important to Brigham Young if
Yeah.
that happened.
Hmm.
And they wanted they wanted the Indians to go and steal things from these immigrant companies in order
Mhm.
to enrich the Mormons because the military was coming. So he had been ordering this type of thing. Now, whether or not he had ordered a full massacre
Mhm.
prior to this moment,
Mhm.
there's not necessarily evidence of that. But Will Bagley's assertion is that he had been ordering violence against these immigrant companies, and that phrase in that letter, when he was asked in the one letter, what should we do?
Yeah.
That phrase, let the Indians do what they will. He is just certain that that's what
Yeah.
Brigham Young
Yeah.
was doing.
Yeah.
Whereas other historians who I think are very fair about the
Mhm.
overall
Mhm.
situation and aren't afraid to call out the church about blood atonement or, things like that, or some of the behavior that Brigham Young and even just a lot of the Mormons engaged in back then, they don't think that Brigham Young ordered it. And I'm not a historian, so I'm going to leave that up to them, but
Yeah. Yeah.
he was a horrible human being and he
Yeah.
harmed so many people.
Yeah. Well, and so that brings me to the other thing that that whole situation makes me think of, which is Richard Robinson.
Mhm.
Since we last talked about this, I have been thinking a lot about what state of mind he might have been in, depending on the various uh, uh, situations. So maybe he was there at the site in the days before, and for whatever reason was called back to Pinto or decided to go back to Pinto. And then, had he done that, he would have heard about the massacre. He would have seen the aftermath. He certainly would have seen people come back to Pinto, seen children from the massacre come back to Pinto.
And I was able to verify, by the way, that there were children that were placed in Pinto. Little
Okay.
Marianne, as an 11, 12-year-old girl, she would have been
Hmm.
aware of these children in the
Yeah.
area. That was a side
Yeah.
note. I wanted to just verify that with
Yeah.
you.
So seeing the traumatized faces of children.
Mhm.
Probably for many, many, many nights afterwards, heard children crying in bed.
Mhm.
I wonder what he thought, what he thought had happened. Did he believe that Brigham Young ordered it? Did he believe that it was a mistake? Did he believe that it was entirely the fault of John D. Lee? What did he think? The fact that he seems to have said nothing about it feels off to me.
I agree.
That is, I mean, it's a very Mormon thing to have ethical problems with what's going on and say nothing and just fall in line,
Mm.
do what you're told, put it on your shelf,
Yep.
and avoid it.
Yeah.
Had he disagreed with it and had he thought that it was entirely Lee and not Brigham Young, why is there no record of him saying this? Of saying
Um,
Lee was a madman. Lee broke the commandments. Lee betrayed the church. Why is there no mention of that?
I think there's no mention because it didn't happen. And
Yeah.
there is a story, and I wish I could remember the guy's name, but there is a story that I was reminded of that I knew before from reading these other books, but I hadn't thought of it when we were chatting last time, but was reminded listening to this book by Will Bagley. There was a meeting, I think even the day before the massacre, where a lot of the militiamen were called together, and John D. Lee, like all the leaders were there, and
Mhm.
basically saying what we will likely be doing. I don't know how much in detail because I do know some people showed up not understanding that they were going
Yeah.
to engage. So
Yeah.
maybe it was just amongst the higher people, maybe not just the regular militiamen. I'm not sure, but there was a man, and again, I wish I could remember his name, who spoke up in the meeting against John D. Lee, told him it was not right, and like fiercely argued and just the whole
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
And at the end of it, when he wasn't getting anywhere, was basically, I can't control what you all do, but I
Hmm.
will not be involved in this, blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah.
And he recorded later, or maybe it was when he was being interviewed later, when he left the person's house. I want to say maybe it was William Dame's house or Isaac Hates' house. I'm not sure. One of the top leaders. He left the house. He noticed two men follow him who were pretty much henchmen of the
Yeah.
leaders.
Yeah.
And he got on his horse and he went the like he noticed them. He went out, he got on his horse, and he went boom, like just like
Yeah.
took off,
Just took
and
off.
he went home a roundabout other way, completely different than what would have been obvious to them for him to take.
Mm-hmm.
And he recorded later, I'm not quite sure how this story was later told, but basically that he was confident that those men had been sent after him to kill
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
So that was recorded. So it was,
Yeah.
there were people who stood up and said,
Mhm.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
And those stories were recorded. There's nothing in the record about Richard taking a stand.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and maybe we could say, okay, well that perhaps paints him in a slightly better light, that he kept his mouth shut out of fear. But again, the only reason that he would have to fear is if Brigham Young was not on Richard Robinson's side.
the good side.
Right? If Richard, if Brigham Young had said, this is all John D. Lee's fault, anybody who spoke out against him, was obeying, the words of God, was being righteous,
Mhm.
you know, the fact that he just clammed up and went quiet
Yeah.
suggests to me that he recognized the consequences of speaking out.
Yeah.
And so that suggests, again, that this was something that was supported from the top. This was a decision that was supported from the top. And everybody knew that they should not talk about it.
Yeah.
So,
I agree with you. And again, it just goes back to us when we were talking about last time about, maybe he wasn't there, but we don't think he gets credit for courage.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that happens. And within a couple years, he is made Bishop of Pinto.
Okay.
Is like he makes his money running a dairy. Again, they've deeded everything over to the church, right? But they're
Mhm.
still able to use all of their things, and they're in charge of a lot of things. He's still able to make money. He just doesn't technically own all of this stuff.
Uh-huh.
As we know, so Mormons have a what they call a health code called the Word of Wisdom.
Word of wisdom, yeah.
And I won't go into all the details about what it is. Today, from the outside looking into Mormonism, like people who are not Mormon that maybe are friends with Mormons or work with Mormons know that they don't drink alcohol, they don't drink coffee or tea, they don't smoke cigarettes. These are Mormons who follow the Word of Wisdom, I
Yeah.
should
Yeah.
don't do those things. Like they no illegal drugs, no. So I mean it's supposed to be super clean living. Now, it in no way means that Mormons are healthier than other people
Yeah. Mhm.
because Mormons eat a lot of sugar and they
Yeah.
drink a lot of soda pop that doesn't have caffeine in it, and
Mhm.
they fried food and
Yeah.
there's tons of desserts, like um there are maybe there's not a ton of bars all throughout you. I mean, there is now, but like maybe there aren't, say, like liquor stores on every other corner in Utah, but there are ice cream shops and there are soda shops and there are, it's not like Mormons are healthier than anybody else, but
Yeah.
they tell themselves that they're making, Now, I say all of that. uh, Listen, people that don't, drink alcohol at all and then are safe from maybe alcoholism because maybe it would run in their
Yeah.
families. I
Sure.
will never criticize people for not drinking alcohol. I don't, like
Yeah.
I've tried it a little. I haven't loved it,
Yeah.
since leaving the
Yeah.
church. I haven't
Hmm.
loved it.
Yeah.
Um, I sure do love my coffee though. I will tell you that.
Well,
But
I know plenty of people who, were never Mormon, who are currently not religious at all, who still don't drink alcohol for the simple fact that they just don't like the taste of it.
yeah,
Yeah, drinking or not drinking, eating or not eating something doesn't really say anything about you. So, but every religion in history has used eating and drinking something as a purity symbol.
exactly.
So,
Yeah. So that's just the Mormons' purity symbol. So the revelation on this health code in Mormonism called the Word of Wisdom was, it was given by Joseph Smith back in the 1830s. However, it wasn't really considered a hard and fast rule, like a hard and fast
mm,
law in regard to what would make somebody worthy or unworthy
yeah.
to participate in church. quite frankly, until Prohibition
Hmm.
in the
Yeah.
1920s.
Yeah.
And so nowadays, like Mormons cannot enter the temple and do temple worship if they have broken the word of wisdom. They
Mm.
can't have certain callings and positions within the church if they break the word of wisdom. Like
Mm.
it is so super strict. And um it's a big deal to Mormons. Believing Mormons today are super strict about this. Uh it wasn't considered in the same way back in the 1800s, which is kind of funny to Mormons now looking back, like believing Mormons now looking back. When they find out that Brigham Young had wineries, like they're shocked.
Yeah. Yeah.
It couldn't have been him.
Yeah. That can't be true. Yeah.
He did
Yeah.
the wineries. And excuse me, um, Richard Robinson, as the Bishop of Pinto, had a brewery and
Mhm.
he brewed beer and it was
Yeah.
just the way things were. And so I just wanted to explain all of that before I go into talking about the fact that one of the ways that he made his money was he had this brewery and it they they called him a beer bishop,
Mhm.
which was to them it was kind of like
Hilarious.
ha ha ha. But today you'd be like, what? Like within
Yeah.
Mormonism that would never happen,
Yeah.
but it did back at this time. Um So apparently this is what Cousin Dennis says about it. Actually, let me back up a little bit and I'm going to get into that, but because there's some interesting little details here. So in July of 1859, the Pinto branch, which is kind of a precursor to a ward, which is a congregation, was implemented. And Richard Robinson was called as the president of this branch. He eventually was made bishop of this branch. That's just technical Mormon lingo. It's not that important, just to say that he was the leader of
Yeah.
Pinto.
Yeah.
Let's see. As homes were added to the Pinto settlement, they continued to be built fort style, close together in two rows for protection from Indians. Excuse me, I need to clear my throat. I thought this was a fun detail. In the spring of 1860, about the time the Pony Express commenced operations, Pinto was organized as a precinct of Washington County, and Richard was appointed road supervisor. Actually, now I'm not sure why he mentions the Pony Express. I got excited, like maybe it was one of the stops, but I don't think maybe it was.
Hmm.
Anyway, so then it just goes on to talk about how his father, Edward Robinson, up in American Fork, which is several miles or several hours away, car drive now, so it's very far away, but Edward Robinson also was a brewer,
Hmm.
um, and gained a reputation as being very good at it. And then Richard
Hmm.
ended up taking up the same trade. So Richard also plied the trade proficiently and profitably with a reputation that earned him a small aura of fame
Hmm.
among aficionados of premium quality beer.
Hmm.
Let's see. So yeah, so I mean that's basically how he made his money. He also had, dairy cows and would make milk and butter. Sorry, his dairy would produce milk, butter, and cheese. The beer bishops, much respected barrels of brew, sold quickly to California-bound immigrants once
Hmm.
it was okay with them selling again. He would sell his beer to the immigrants going to California and contributed quite satisfactory to the family's livelihood. So, my throat. Let's see. Talks about occasionally there were still some what they would have called Indian raids. Let's see. So this part is in so he's just chatting about Richard and Elizabeth and their marriage. He talks about sorry, that was a tangent. Um he talks about how of the 9 children born to Richard and Elizabeth at Pinto, 3 died near the age of 1, which is something
Hmm.
that we talked
We
about
talked
being,
about, yeah.
yeah. Um, that little Edward died at 1 year, Emma Jane died at 10 months, and then little William died at 14 months.
Hmm.
He suspects syphilis at this point.
Hmm.
He doesn't say anything about that, but I'm feeling really confident that that is
Hmm.
what they experienced. I did also want to share something that I discovered. So we kind of went through the different children when we were talking about syphilis, the ones that Elizabeth had a baby die, a baby live, 2 babies die, but that baby that lived ended up taking his own life and he had
Hmm.
epilepsy and he seemed like he had what they would have called insanity.
Hmm.
So all those babies in a row to us that either died or then ended up living with what looks like syphilis to us is screaming syphilis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mentioned that Marianne's oldest baby, so the ones I just mentioned are Elizabeth's children. Marianne's the second wife. Her first baby died the same year that Elizabeth's baby died. Her
Hmm.
third her baby Emma Jane died. They were born and died the same year, and so
Hmm.
we're just thinking syphilis, right?
Hmm.
And then Marianne's youngest baby died. And I just thought, well, that's interesting. It could have been anything. Like
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah. Lots of reasons for infant deaths at the time.
exactly. But what's fascinating, and again, we don't know, but I just wanted to share this detail with you. So the youngest baby, his name was Amos. He died within a year, just like those.
Hmm.
The child that was born just before him, his name was Hiram. And I was reading through Hiram's life once he grew up and had a family. He and his wife, they got married and started having children right away. Their first three babies died. Boom, boom, boom. Isn't that fascinating? And so he was born just before. So baby Amos died. He was the baby right before. And his first three babies died. And then the baby just above him, his name is James, I think. He died when he was 20, but I can't find a cause of death.
Hmm.
And I've looked because I'm like, could it be something like with his older sibling John took his own life and
Hmm.
suffered from insanity. And so I'm like, is that what happened? Is something kind of fishy happen like that? I say fishy as in like would make us suspect syphilis again. I
Yeah.
don't know, but that little detail about Hiram being just older than Amos and his first three babies died in a row within a year. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well,
Like they
and this might not be something that it is possible to verify. Um, but I wonder if there are, any statistical data out there that could tell us what the chances of three babies in a row dying from
anything else.
three different unrelated causes. I mean, we know that infant mortality was high, that death shortly after birth was frequent.
Yeah.
But how frequent was it that it happened three times in a row?
So one of the other children had three babies die in a row, and I was like, oh my gosh, kind of the same thing. But then
Mm-hmm.
when I looked at the dates of them dying, like they were like 3 and then 4, so older than that 1 year mark.
Yeah.
Um, and two of them died the same day. And so then when I looked, I was like, okay, we're talking about a sickness or an accident. And when I dug in,
Yeah.
I can't quite remember, but I believe um that they both died of the same illness.
Okay.
And their sibling that was just younger had been born around that same time as those other children died.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like maybe 6 months later that baby
Yeah.
died.
Yeah.
It seems pretty clear to me that that's an illness that they had all
Right. Right.
gotten, a virus, something.
Yeah.
But
High
when
mortality rate and yeah.
exactly, so when three babies die in a row or four babies like separate from each other, all within about a year, I do remember when we watched that clip from Who Do You Think You Are? The doctor that was talking to Martin Freeman said specifically, when we see that many babies die in a row,
Mhm.
there's almost nothing else that causes it other than syphilis.
Yeah. Yeah.
That my brain really honed in
Mm.
on that because it
Hmm.
was like, well, I think that's our answer then.
Yeah.
So it's not that, and I have in other families in our genealogy, I have seen other things where kind of the same thing, like two children die again, like the same day, and it was because
Mm.
they were in an accident.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
two of their children were
Yeah.
something horrible happened, and two of their children died. So
Yeah.
I've seen that, but when there's so many like 1-year-olds that die in
Mm.
a row,
Hmm.
that doctor,
Yeah.
there's almost no
When
evidence.
when they fit a pattern, where it's like, yeah, a baby is born and then lives sickly for a couple of months and then dies. And then 13 months later, another baby's born and lives sickly for a couple of months and then dies. And then once again, third time, same pattern. That feels unlikely.
And that's
I didn't,
what that doctor
yeah,
was saying. Yeah.
yeah. In all of the patterns of mortality, all of the dangers that children face, um, that, yeah, I'm sure someone out there has done some, like meta research and compiled some statistics. Um, it feels like three babies in a row dying according to the same, specifics. That suggests that
Yeah.
it's the same
It's
cause.
syphilis. Yeah, that it's syphilis.
So,
Yeah, that's to me what that looks like. So I just wanted to share that because I stumbled upon that after we chatted
yeah,
about syphilis, and I was
yeah.
like, oh my gosh, here's somebody else that it looks like
Hmm.
affected by it. So, okay, so now Dennis is moving in the direction of talking about polygamy in regard
Okay.
to Richard. And again, this is another area where it really feels like it's being presented as like this was God's will, this is how he
Hmm.
wanted things to
Yeah.
be.
So just so that I understand fully, how many years were he and his first wife married before Mountain Meadows Massacre?
For 4 years,
4 years. Okay. And so then how many years between Mountain Meadows Massacre and his second wife?
3 years.
3. Okay. So he's married to his first wife for only 7 years before he takes his second wife.
Mm-hmm.
And he and his first wife were relatively close in age,
5 years apart.
5 years apart. So all of that sounds very normal. Okay.
And at this point, he is approaching 30. I think he's not quite
Mm.
yet 30,
Mm.
24, 25.
Yeah.
So Dennis talks about how sad Elizabeth was when these several babies in a row died that we talked about that
Mm.
we think it was syphilis.
Mm.
And that she, I don't know, it's just to me it's such a stretch. So he talks about these babies that die, and then he says pioneer life could be hard, and
Mm.
deaths of infants and children helped make it excruciatingly so. So like it made it even worse knowing how many
Mhm.
babies,
Mhm.
children and infants, how quickly they could die. Elizabeth expressed her private concern about gospel teachings that indicated that she would have a quote opportunity to raise her dead children in the hereafter. And in another place, it talks about how she actually went to one of the big church leaders, like one of the apostles was in town, and she went to him, and this is later, and was just like, I'm so worried. Am I going to have to raise these three babies all at the same time? Like she just was like, I don't think I could handle three babies all at the same time. Like because the Mormon teaching is that when children die under the age of 8, that in the afterlife or the next life, that mothers will be able to raise these children. And so Elizabeth, fully believing that she had had these three babies die, she one baby is a lot and overwhelming, and she was so worried about having to raise three brand new babies all together. It was just in her head what she was worried about. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Strange.
Mhm.
Yeah, to worry that something will be too difficult when you're in heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much to say about it. I don't know where to begin
Right.
talking about it. So let's just move
Yeah.
on.
Right. And then he says about her, she was not at all sure that she could cope with three babies on her lap at a time. And or at one time, and it required an apostle to eventually allay her concerns, is what he said. And he mentions it just briefly, but I read the other record that explains it in more detail, but he just
Mm.
refer, references it generally. And then he says, and this is the part where I'm just like, it just feels like such a stretch and just trying to justify something that's horrific.
Mhm.
But he says, perhaps such worries made it easier for Elizabeth to accept sister wives for company, compassion, and additional assistance. Already with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, Elizabeth gave birth to a baby girl in 1859. Marianne Eccles, a young neighbor girl, was probably a big help to Elizabeth, and Marianne's mother, who was called the widow Eccles because Thomas had
Mhm.
died at this point, her husband,
Mhm.
who was called the widow Eccles, needed help too. Her husband having died that spring, leaving Alice Eccles with 3 girls to feed. In pioneer settlements, it was essential for neighbors to reach out to each other, and as local presiding authority, Richard had more than the usual obligation to serve those in need. On occasion, human kindness, dire conditions, or mutual need provoked plural marriage as much as love, at least at the beginning of some relationships. Pioneers were nothing if not practical, and necessity often trumped choice. We cannot
Wow. Yeah, keep going.
we cannot now know all the motives and emotions invested in agreements between people, but Richard and Elizabeth required support, as did their good neighbors. Taking another wife would help both Elizabeth and the widow. On the 10th of March, 1860, a civil marriage was performed at Parowan by Apostle Amasa Lyman, where Richard married Marianne Eccles, a young girl of 15.
Notice the conspicuous absence of the fact that she was pregnant
No,
at
no,
the
no,
time.
no, no, no. That was her sister.
Oh,
So
okay.
Martha and Martha and David Tullis. David Tullis was the one that got his 15-year-old stepdaughter pregnant before he married her.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, that's okay because they were living in the house, yeah, the same house.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
Uh,
Okay.
but like I don't even know where to begin with this. It
Well, I
this is
mean,
partly when the so many episodes ago when I was like I felt pain when I read
yeah.
Dennis's words.
Well, he is being so careful to not acknowledge that there could be a dark side to any of this. And all of those, the little comments he makes, like frontier life can be difficult. Okay. Well, what it always comes back to, it's like, okay, so this young teenage girl living a difficult life, she needs support from neighbors and the community. But Cousin Dennis is going to great length to justify that the cost of that support from the community was marrying and having sex with a man twice her age.
Yeah.
He's justifying the price. Okay, he's justifying the cost put onto her body
Yeah.
for extra support.
Mhm.
And is that something that, Dennis would be comfortable admitting, yes, that is what I'm describing? Or, I mean, yeah,
So
it,
I
it, yeah, it's so Mormon to talk about it in these terms.
like I feel anger to a level that part of me doesn't even know where to begin. So when it says here in pioneer settlements, it is essential for neighbors to reach out to each other and
Yeah,
as
reach
local
out to each other.
as local presiding authority, Richard had more than the usual obligation
Obligation.
to
Yep,
serve those in need. To
yep.
serve those in need.
To serve those in need.
So his service
Hmm.
put him in a position where he got to have sex with a 15-year-old girl. You poor man.
Yeah.
You had to
Yeah,
take
what a
that on.
good heart he has,
What a,
right?
what a
Yeah,
sacrifice.
to take on that burden and support his community. Yeah,
And
it's disgusting.
it's disgusting.
Yeah,
And it makes me angry that Mormons justify this.
yeah, yeah.
She was 15. And like you mentioned several episodes ago, like cousin Dennis here talks about how they were helping out the widow who was trying to feed three daughters. Give her some fucking food.
Yeah,
Give
yeah,
her some fucking food.
yeah, yeah.
I just feel so angry
Hmm.
about
Hmm. Yeah. Well, this taps into lessons that we learned at home and at church going back to very, very early in our childhood. All of the justifications that we heard that polygamy was a grand act of largesse from the men in the community who just wanted to make sure that these women could live comfortable lives in a world that was so hostile toward everyone, but toward women especially. And I mean, I grew up, like nodding my head, thinking, "Oh, okay, yeah, that was so kind of these men.
it.
These were such godly, righteous men." Right? And it was no one ever broached the notion, and the notion never came to my mind to wonder how these women felt about it. The women's opinions were simply not a concern.
They were there to serve the needs of men.
Hmm.
That's all that mattered.
Yeah.
She
And
was,
yeah, this is how polygamy was always framed to us growing up.
and then when it says here, but Richard and Elizabeth required support, as did their good neighbors. Taking another wife would help both Elizabeth and the widow. How in the world is it helpful to Elizabeth to have a teenager come into her home
Hmm.
who then gives birth to 10 babies over the
Yeah.
next 20 years.
Yeah.
That doesn't help Elizabeth.
Hmm.
If anything, it divides Richard's attention. Any hope that Marianne could have, because that has always happened, throughout history, that a couple with children might take in a live-in maid or take in a mother's helper. That's always been a thing. It doesn't,
Yeah.
necessarily
Yeah.
happen today, but that's
Or
very much
paid
been
nannies,
a
au
yeah.
pairs. Yeah.
But the
Hmm.
point is that they are there to help the mother and help her take care of the children, not give birth to children herself.
Yeah.
Like that, she's not a help to the first
Mhm.
wife if she is
Mhm.
also having children.
Yeah. Well, and what support does it actually give the widow that her, for as far as we know, capable 15-year-old daughter to leave the house, to not be around?
Exactly, because if they are all having to work, like at the dairy or doing
Hmm.
laundry or whatever,
Hmm.
having one less able-bodied person to bring money into the home, how is that
Yeah.
helpful to them?
Yeah. Yeah.
To me,
No,
it seems like it puts them in more of a desperate situation.
yeah. Well, all of this is, everything that Cousin Dennis describes here is done to avoid admitting that the impetus behind polygamy was that power-hungry men with creepy urges could take teenage girls. I mean,
That's where it started.
yeah,
That was Joseph Smith
yeah,
in Nauvoo. Not something I ever knew when I was a believing Mormon.
yeah.
How
Well,
many
and,
teenage girls?
I not to get too far into the creepy area, but I mean, I can't imagine being a believer in this way anymore. But if I try to imagine myself being a believer and believing that there is a prophet who's actually talking to the divine, and I somehow continue to believe that the prophet is talking to the divine when he tells me I have to take another wife. If at that point he says, you have to take another wife and it's okay if she's 15, how do you keep believing that man is a prophet?
You do if you like that as doctrine.
Exactly. That's the only way that you keep believing that that dictate comes from God. It's if you're already okay with it.
Yeah.
And I mean, how many records do we have? I mean, I'm reminded of like, how Muslims talk about Muhammad and what's his teenage bride's name?
Who?
Alia? I don't remember. Um, how many records are there of these men taking the teenage brides and then her not giving birth to her first child until 7 years later, right? Or 8 years later,
Right.
right? How often does that happen?
You mean the polygamists?
Right, among the polygamists.
It never.
Never,
It's right away.
right? Yeah. It just
Marianne was, yeah, she was 15. I'm sorry,
Any
she was
every angle that you try to approach this, it leads you to one conclusion, unless you are enough of a believer that you can't let yourself come to that conclusion. And again, we're back to the notion of, not only is religion not the basis of people's morality, but it prevents people from being moral. And that's what I see going on here. If one of these men was like, I don't understand this law, but the prophet says I have to do it, but I'm going to make sure this 15-year-old is 21 before I take her into my marriage bed. Just because that I just can't get behind this.
yeah.
Right? We see no examples of this.
No, and what really hits me in this moment is the people who stayed in Mormonism. I guess it's not universal. We do have ancestors who stayed in Mormonism and also refused to practice polygamy.
Yeah.
Not that many.
Hmm. Yeah, which
Um,
is telling.
for the most part, people who stayed in Mormonism liked this being doctrine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm talking about men who
Yeah.
stayed, because
Hmm.
women, for the most part, didn't have the power to determine their own course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Men that stayed in Mormonism liked
Yeah.
it. This was an option for them.
Hmm.
And that makes me view my ancestry in a very particular way.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of turns my stomach.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, you and I have chatted before, long before embarking on this deep dive. You and I both love history, and have been avid, voracious readers of history. And over the years, as I've had conversations with various family members and they have brought up our Mormon history, I have found myself being on the very passive side of these conversations. And I had wondered why in the past, and I eventually realized that the reason I never delved into it on my own was because when I actually learned about our Mormon ancestors, I didn't like what I learned, right? And I didn't view these people as good people,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that's the problem with, I don't understand devout Mormons who begin diving deep into their Mormon history, who then don't feel conflicted about Mormonism. I don't know how they do that.
What's interesting to me is that I think it goes back to cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
because let me share a story. My children descend from Heber C. Kimball on the other side of the family. And something that my mother-in-law, my former mother-in-law, whom I love deeply to this day, um, expressed many times to me was how much it bothered her. So Heber C. Kimball was married many times. He had many wives. I believe he only had children with five of them. His
Only
youngest,
five of them.
yeah, I know. Um, his youngest wife, his last wife, her name was Mary Smithies. And she was so much younger than him so she was the very first baby in England who received a name and a blessing underneath like Mormonism.
Hmm.
That's a thing that Mormons do now. Babies are given a name and a blessing. It's a Mormon ritual where the priesthood holding men will gather around and place their hands gently on the teeny tiny little baby's head and give them a baby blessing. Um, And Mary Smithies was a teeny tiny little baby, and she was the very first one who received this baby blessing, and it became a thing. The person who gave her that baby blessing was Heber C. Kimball. And then I don't know how old she was when they married. She may still have been a teenager. I don't know. I don't have those facts in front of me. But however many years later, whether that was 15, 20 years later, he marries her, and I believe they had five children together. Um, And he died of old age when all those children were still very, very young. And they grew up without a father. That poor woman was impoverished and she had to take care of these five babies and raise them. And they were desperately poor. And so they were Kimballs. Their last name was Kimball. They were Kimballs. But they grew into adulthood with a lot of problems. I know the son that my children descend from he was an alcoholic. He was violent with his wife in the future. But he was a Kimball. He was a Kimball, and there was a lot of status in that day if you had one of the last names that, from those prominent church leaders. Rightly so, it was something that my mother-in-law felt deep pain about. Like she would just shake her head and just say, I don't understand. I don't understand. And I don't really want to make this about her because
Well, her reaction is the moral reaction to that.
absolutely, but your question is how can people look at their ancestors and like how can they stay in the church? How can
Hmm.
they believe in a religion? And that's what I don't want to make about her because
Yeah.
I'm happy to let people make their choices because I stayed in Mormonism for an awfully long time and I found out, I knew that story. I found
Yeah.
out horrible things. Some of the, things our ancestors did. And I just what the message is and what I told myself because I was told to tell myself this is really that people do the best they can with what they have and God will make it all right in the end. And now and then you just put it on your shelf and you go on with life. But of course, now I look at that and I can see so clearly, for one, what a cop out that is.
Yeah.
But really, it allows people to keep doing awful things, and it expect with this expectation that everybody else, through the power of the atonement to forgive, it creates a situation where, abusers are protected
Hmm.
at the expense of the abused.
Hmm.
And then we're told just, people did the best they can. God will make
Yeah.
it all right in the end. Like we're
Yeah.
not allowed to be enraged and to
Yeah.
demand justice for the
Yeah.
wrongs that are done to people.
Well, and here is where Mormon and generally Christian notions of forgiveness are used to prevent people from making their lives better. Because if you can forgive your great grandfather for being a shitty alcoholic who abused his wife and his children, well, then you can forgive your own husband
Right,
for being a shitty man,
right,
and you stay with him
right.
because that's the atonement.
It teaches people to stay within
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
same. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. It just does. And I will tell you when it comes to, my daughter with disabilities and learning to stand up for her, I literally did not know how. I
Mm.
didn't know how to ask for things to be different because I had
Hmm.
thought so much that all throughout my life that God has a plan for me and what
Yeah.
is happening in my life is God's plan.
Yeah.
So why would I have the right to
Hmm.
demand that my daughter has something better than what she has?
Hmm.
That was so in my mindset as I went into mothering her.
Hmm.
And it took me getting to the point of watching a level of like misery and unhappiness in my daughter to break that inside of me
Hmm.
and for me to dare to stand up to people in authority.
Yeah.
Little by little by little, I was able to do that, but it was so against what I had been taught. And then there was this dissonance inside of me, like part of me felt like I was doing something wrong,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
at the same time, I couldn't not speak up for her
Hmm.
because I was just so
Yeah.
angry about her. But it took me loving a child that much. I mean, I love all my children that much, but it took me having the ability to help my child. I
Hmm.
wasn't willing to do that for myself.
Hmm.
It was just so I had been conditioned to be submissive
Yeah.
and to think there must be a reason why life is the way that it is. God will make everything right in the end.
Yeah.
It teaches people to not listen to their
Yeah.
gut, not
Yeah.
listen to their core, do not listen to their own sense of
Hmm.
justice.
Hmm.
That if we have a problem with what's going on, we are being prideful. And if we don't understand, that's because we are just human beings and we have things to learn. We need to trust in
Hmm.
our leaders
Hmm.
and doubt ourselves.
Yeah. What's the phrase that we hear often now? Is it instilled helplessness or
It's learned helplessness.
a learned helplessness? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And there's always the question, that people ask, you know, how conscious are the leaders that this is what they are teaching? And I think for many of them, they are fully conscious of what they're teaching. Those who aren't, I don't think that they necessarily realize that they are teaching people to be helpless, but they notice what beliefs result in people being helpless. And those are the beliefs that they promote.
Mhm.
And I don't know that they consciously realize that's what they're doing. But they have notions of what Mormon men should be like and what Mormon women should be like. And then they promote the things that lead in those directions.
Mhm.
And either way, they're responsible for it, right? Just like either way, whether a parent intended to hurt a child or not, if they treat the child in such a way that results in that child being hurt, when they had plenty of indications around them that that would be the eventual result,
Mhm.
we still hold them responsible for it.
Still call it abuse.
We still call it abuse. And so all of the justifications we hear of like, oh, this is what was necessary at the time. Well, my first reaction to that is, what other better options were available and why didn't they use them?
There were people who were standing up. There were people who were saying no to polygamy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you cannot tell me it's not. So a couple of episodes ago, I used the example of germ theory, how
Hmm.
it's now pretty much universally understood. There was a time when legitimately nobody knew better.
Yeah.
Nobody knew better. This is not that.
Yeah.
Like when this was happening, there were people who stood up and said
Mhm.
no. So you can't tell me that like human beings at that time didn't have the ability
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Well, and to again, yeah, to connect it back to the main idea that we're talking about here. Why did some men refuse, right? Why did they say, I'm not doing this? Well, they said it because they had an innate sense that there's something wrong with it,
yep.
right? It's not like we're talking about some competing cultural norm, right? That they somehow couldn't shed themselves from to get fully on board with God's divine plan, right? We're talking about a deeply ingrained, inherent notion that there's something wrong with a 30-year-old man having sex with a 15-year-old girl.
There were 50-year-old men having
Yeah,
sex,
yeah,
and we will get to some of those stories.
yeah. And going back to Heber C. Kimball, it seems so grotesque to me that he, on his wedding night with his young wife, the thought crosses his mind that he stood over her as an infant.
Right. Like how he was not a good man.
Yeah,
Like how
yeah,
there is no justification for
yeah,
that. It's wrong.
yeah.
It's
And and
wrong.
and Mormons can't seem to reach that destination, right? They can't seem to say, yeah, it's wrong. It was wrong. So,
Joseph Smith, when he was trying to take Nancy Rigdon as a wife and she refused,
mhm,
and the he wrote that letter to her and it's called the
mhm. The
happiness letter.
happiness letter, yeah.
In that letter, he says sometimes what we think is not right is actually right under certain
Mm,
circumstances.
yeah.
Joseph Smith was teaching Mormon men from then on out
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
follow what the church says, even if under other circumstances, it wouldn't seem like this is what is right. If this is what the church leaders want you to do, you need to do it. Now,
You
yes,
need
the
to do
letter
it.
was to her, but the fact that that letter became doctrine,
Hmm.
it continued for until today to teach
Yeah,
what
yeah.
what doesn't feel right in your core, it's still right if the
You
church says
should,
it. And I
yeah,
think that's
yeah,
why otherwise decent people become prejudiced against gay people.
yeah.
Otherwise decent people um, vote for a rapist to go
Hmm.
to the
Yeah, twice.
presidency twice now. That's why otherwise decent people can look at somebody up on stage who does the fucking Nazi
Yeah,
salute
yeah.
and they don't do any they're like, oh
Yeah.
well, whatever,
Well,
whatever.
yeah. It's Mormon loyalty. It's in-group bias. He's one of us. And it doesn't really matter how he behaves. He's one of us. He's God's chosen.
So in other circumstances this wouldn't be okay, but because of, fill in the blank, it is okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how they are justifying not standing up for what is right.
Well, we got sidetracked by outrage again.
Oh no, I think that's going to happen a lot.
Yeah. All
Um,
right. So
so
he
yeah,
takes his 15-year-old bride
yes.
with his first wife, still being a young woman in her 20s.
Yeah,
And how soon do they have a child?
right away. So
Right away.
And her name is they name her Alice Ann. They marry in 1860. This baby is born in 1861.
Hmm.
Um, and it is more than 9 months, so we know that there wasn't, well, we don't know, but
Yeah, we don't know.
according to the birth, it doesn't look like he slept with her before they were married or anything like that. But that baby passes away. And then her next baby is Robert, and he is our second great grandfather. So he is our grandmother Beverly's grandfather, but
Mhm.
he died in 1933, and our grandmother was born in 1930. So she would have only been 3 years old when her
Okay.
grandfather passed away. So we're talking about when Robert was born, but that's how we connect because Robert is our grandmother's grandfather.
Yeah. So just for my curiosity, Robert was born in what year?
I believe it was 1863.
Hmm. And then Robert fathered our grandmother's parent, and who was that?
Her name was Margaret Geneva. And
Okay.
actually, let me pull up the actual thing so I
Yeah.
can tell you the real dates. So,
So
Robert,
Robert was Margaret's father. Margaret was Beverly's mother.
yes, so Robert Eccles Robinson is Mary Ann Eccles' second child, but oldest child because her first
Hmm.
passes away. He was born in 1863, and then when he's exactly 30, it looks like his third child is born, and her name is Margaret Geneva Robinson, but they called her either Geneva. I think she might have even gone by Jenny, like
Hmm.
Genny. She was not called Margaret, I know that, but
Okay.
it was
Okay.
Geneva. So Margaret Geneva Robinson, she was born in 1893. And then our grandmother was born in 1930. And
Oh.
our grandmother was a caboose baby. I think she was baby number five. Her four older siblings were quite close together. And
Mhm.
then she was quite a few years later. So she was much
So Beverly's
younger.
mother was almost 40
Yeah,
when she had Beverly.
exactly. And in fact, really quick, I want to show you, but I want to show you a photograph. Um, that I'm going to share with you really fast. And I think you're going to love this. Not that. It's fine. We can do it that way. Hold on. Okay. I don't want that. That's the door. No. Share. That's what I'm looking for. I keep clicking on the wrong thing. Okay. So the woman in black here is Robert's wife. Her name was Cora. Um, and if I scroll in, can you see that little girl down there? Do you know who that is?
Is that Beverly?
Beverly.
I can see just the tiniest resemblance.
Hmm.
Beverly was always such a slender woman, and there's some chubby cheeks on this kid, so it's a little hard.
Sure.
I can see the eyes.
Hmm.
That's Beverly's eyes.
Yep. And to give you like perspective on what I'm talking about, this girl that's standing above her
Hmm.
is her older sister.
Her older sister.
And then this girl that I'm pointing to over here is her older sister.
Okay. Hmm.
Oh, and this is Geneva. This is Geneva right here. So that gives you an idea of kind of like the difference in age for
Uh-huh.
Everly compared to her siblings.
So this is three generations. We've
Mhm.
got Beverly and her sisters,
So
their
Beverly
mother in the background,
mhm,
and Cora,
is Geneva's mother.
Geneva's mother.
Is
And so
Robert,
she's married to Robert.
Robert's wife. And in fact, let me take you back because there's several that would be worth you seeing. Again,
So that photo must have been taken in 35, 36.
I wonder if that was at Robert's funeral. Because
So
Beverly, I mean,
Beverly was
I
only
wonder,
three there.
yeah.
Huh.
Hmm.
I thought she looked older than that.
And it might be, I'm guessing, I don't actually know.
Well, it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
Um, but I'm gonna show you a couple more here. So this is Robert's family. So this is
Okay.
Robert
Hmm.
and this is Cora. Um, And then this up here, this is Geneva. And
Uh,
they had a lot of children together, but Geneva was third. So this is Robert Eccles Robinson Jr. So the oldest is a boy and he was a
mhm,
junior. The first daughter was named, so the first son was named after the father, Robert. The
mhm.
first daughter was named after the mother, Cora.
Uh, uh,
Cora's mother's name is Margaret. And so then, our great grandmother is named after Cora's mother, Margaret, but
mm,
Margaret Geneva, and they call her Jenny. I think they called her Jenny with a G.
mhm.
And there were lots of these younger siblings here. Gr
So we're seeing here our
Great grandmother,
great grandmother and great great grandfather.
great grandparents. Yep, this is Richard's son, Richard and
Mhm.
Marianne's son.
Okay.
So this little gal dies when she's 18.
Mhm.
In 1918, I wonder if she dies of the flu, the Spanish flu. I'm
Oh,
not.
right, right.
Dies in 1918. You can see it right over here. Grace Robinson.
Uh-huh.
She died at 18 years old in
Yeah,
1918.
yeah.
So I'm not positive. I haven't found that death record, but that's what it says to me. Maybe,
One of the weird facts we know about the
that year.
Spanish flu was that it had a high death rate of young people in their prime.
Yep.
So young men and women were highly susceptible.
This is also as a side, this Ross, who was Jenny's younger brother, he died in his 50s. The most random thing, he dropped his car off at the shop and was walking across a highway where his ride was waiting for him. This is in the 50s. And he gets hit by a car on the highway and he dies. How random is that?
Yeah.
Oh, so sad. He's like 57 or something.
Well,
Um, and the rest of I don't know a lot about these other kids.
sure. Yeah, yeah. Well,
And
yeah,
this is
let's
just
not introduce too many new names here or
no,
yeah,
and
we can all
this
get
is just
lost.
yeah, this is just me like sharing.
Yeah. So Robert is Richard's first surviving child. Margaret Geneva is his daughter, who is our great grandmother, and she gives birth to Beverly.
So you're almost exactly correct. Robert is Marianne's first surviving child,
Okay.
not Richard's first surviving child. He has a lot of kids with Elizabeth.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, yes, with his new wife.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So,
then Margaret Geneva is Robert's third child. She is our great grandmother.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
I just want to show you one more. This is just for you because I don't know when else I would show you these for you to even
Hmm.
see.
Hmm.
So this is Beverly's whole family.
Hmm.
This is Geneva, her husband, who's a bishop, and that's why she's
Hmm.
Beverly Bishop. These are her two older sisters. These are her two older brothers. And then there's little teeny tiny Beverly.
Yeah. So Elaine and Dion. Dion as a girl's name.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Never
And
seen that.
Marion as a boy's name.
I've heard of that before, but I've never heard of Dion as a girl's name. Well, I can see a resemblance with Dion, with how Beverly would eventually look.
Yeah,
I don't really see it with Elaine.
yeah, not as much.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
interesting.
and then there's this one last one that I'll show you, and this is when Beverly's a teenager.
Yeah.
So I think she's
So
not
this
as
would have been 45,
yeah, and because
around mid
she
1940s.
mid 1940s, I think she's like 14, 15 here. So it's definitely what's interesting to me is that these guys aren't soldiers.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what because she was born in 1930. So
Hmm.
they're both married at this point, and
Okay.
um the teenage girls are. And then sorry, Beverly's sisters are married in this picture.
Hmm.
But anyway, so yeah, so that's Marion Bishop. They called him Mon, and then Geneva, and then the two girls that are the oldest, and then the two boys come next, and then little Beverly was the caboose.
Yeah.
So anyway, kind of cute, huh?
Yeah, it is. I've never seen this photo before. This is a cool photo to see.
Yeah.
I can so recognize Beverly. She was
Yep.
always, her whole life, she was always slim and her facial features stayed mostly the same through her life. She just got older.
Yep.
Um,
Always dainty.
yeah, but she's always, yeah, no matter what age she was at, she was always recognizable.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So fun. But anyway. Okay, so let's get back on track. So,
Yeah.
um, let me stop sharing my screen. That was just for you, really. I mean,
Mhm.
I'll listen and keep in whatever I want to keep in, but okay, so from here on out, we just keep hearing about Richard's service in the church. We hear about
Mhm.
more and more babies die. Sorry, let me say that again. More and more babies are born. Elizabeth had 12 children total. Marianne had 10 children total.
Mhm.
Third wife's name is Mary Kate. She only has one baby and then dies like a year later.
She herself dies. The mother dies.
The
Okay.
mother dies, the baby lives. Um, so this is something I wanted to share just because at this point, as I'm reading through this history, I'm annoyed with Richard. I don't like him. I'm like, and so like I view everything from this angle, and other people maybe wouldn't view it this way, but I
Mhm.
found myself just being annoyed. So it talks about how so apparently one of the apostles, George Q. Cannon, it says Apostle George Q. Cannon hailed Richard as a quote natural comedian full of ready wit and humor and endowed with rare gifts as an entertainer. He was widely known for his singing, storytelling, and preaching. And to me, I'm just like, he just, to me, sounds like he was just in his element. He had these two wives and then three wives, and he had all these
Mhm.
kids, and he's kind of like the king of this community.
Yeah.
And it says here Richard's preference for casual informality and playful humor was demonstrated at a ward conference in Cedar City. And then this is recorded about this thing that happened that the family just thought was funny. So Bishop Lunt arose on the stand, and so this is a conference in another town. He's bishop at Pinto. This is a bishop of one of the other communities, but it's a conference where a lot of the congregations have gotten together. So it says Bishop Lunt arose on the stand and asked, "Is Richard Robinson in the congregation?" There was no reply. He repeated his words more loudly, and the heads of all the people turned around and they craned their necks trying to locate Richard. Excuse me, trying to locate Richard, who sat near an aisle in the middle of the audience, twirling his thumbs as he used to do, with a look of absolute innocence on his countenance. Everyone saw him and knew he was there, and again the old bishop called for Richard Robinson to come to the stand. Richard kept on twirling his thumbs until Bishop Lunt or someone else on the stand said, "Is Dick Robinson here?" Richard answered very quickly, "Yes, sir," and strode up the aisle amidst a storm of laughter. It was pretty well understood that he preferred the name Dick in his younger days, and he was known as Singing Dick to his mining companions while in California. Now, plenty of people would read that story and be like, "Ha ha ha, that's funny." So, he's just being silly. I just think it, I just think he sounds so arrogant.
Yeah.
That's how that reads to me.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people wouldn't, and a lot of people might listen to my response to that and say, "Why are you being so like sensitive? Why are you being so like I don't know, like buddy-duddy?" I don't even know what word I'm looking for, but I just I just feel like he sounds arrogant. That's all.
Well, yeah. I mean, how old is he at this point? Yeah. It's hard to say why, exactly people do what they, those little personality quirks, that sort of thing. Um, it doesn't strike me as a particularly admirable way to be.
Like I won't
And
respond unless you call
call
me.
me exactly what I prefer to be called.
Now, there are situations, like it depends on the circumstances, okay? Like if somebody has been very disrespectful to you
Mhm.
and they call you the wrong name on purpose just to be disrespectful,
Yeah,
you get
yeah,
to the
which
point
happens.
where you don't respond to that person unless they
Hmm.
address you in a respectful way.
Yeah.
That's different. They're just at a ward conference and they're just
Hmm.
asking, "Is Richard
Yeah.
Robinson here?" And
Yeah.
he just
How?
sits there, just
Yeah.
and it brings all the attention to
Yeah.
him. It's like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just I just
No,
think
yeah, it feels odd. Yeah, it certainly doesn't strike me as an admirable way to behave. Do we have any reason to expect that this speaker knew to call him Dick Robinson?
it sounds to me like he didn't.
Sounds like he had no idea,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah. Mormons are always talking about, showing humility,
Right.
um, recognizing that somebody doesn't necessarily know to call you a certain thing and then refusing to respond if they don't call you that when there's no reason that they would know to call you that. It just sounds like it's a teenage prank.
Yeah. I mean, I look at him and I'm like, at this point, what is she, 20? Like
Yeah.
he married again. He married a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just struggle. I
Yeah.
just yeah. So then it says Richard's cheerful teasing could, however, occasionally cause anxiety in those
Occasionally.
yeah. Richard's cheerful teasing could occasionally cause anxiety in those too young to recognize it. He once told his 10th child, Mary Ellen, that she would be turned in for tithing, a jibe which disturbed her greatly until she was old enough to discern her father's humor. I'm sorry, it's not funny.
Yeah.
It's not funny. So I know. So, and that's what I mean. Like they're to other
Well,
people, they might say, well, these are little things. You're just being too
yeah.
sensitive. And I'm sorry, I'm not though. I'm
Yeah.
not good.
No, I mean, this reminds me of it. Yeah, that falls in the same category as I named my son Alice because I wanted him to be tough.
Yeah.
It's like you think it's this superficial little thing that, is going to produce something that you want, but it actually is causing this child to live extensively with all kinds of shitty experiences. And you think that you're just, setting them up for success or whatever.
So this, I look at little Mary Ellen, this 10th child of his, and in that moment, she learned that her father would just give her away. And from that moment on, it, I believe, likely caused her to feel worthless,
Hmm.
feel
Hmm.
unloved,
Yeah.
to feel like
Yeah.
she wasn't important.
Yeah.
Because, and this is what the joke is, tithing is 1/10. She's the 10th child.
Hmm. Yeah.
But that's not, but it's not funny.
Yeah, little things like that make sense to children's minds, right? I'm the 10th child, 1/10, blah,
Yeah.
blah, giving away for tithing. Yeah.
But it's not funny
Hmm.
to that little child.
Yeah.
So, and I'm speaking as somebody who believed the things that my dad said to me.
Well, and that's what's coming to my mind at this moment. Little things that seem innocuous that actually would be innocuous if the parents actually had a real kind, loving relationship with their children. But the thing that comes to my mind is like, the the simple request that we made as kids, like, why can't we have a dishwasher? And our father responded, well, I already have five, right? And, if we had had a genuine, kind,
Yeah.
accepting, loving relationship, that would have been a nothing comment. It would have been a joke, and we would have laughed about it. But I remember feeling, and, after that response and so many similar responses, feeling like, he wanted us just to make his life easier. He didn't want us for us. He didn't want us because we were humans, right? And then we would eventually become adults. He didn't want us because he wanted children. He wanted us because we would be a convenience for him in some way.
We would make him look good, like look like a
Yeah,
righteous
yeah,
man, righteous Mormon man.
yeah,
And we already know that the females in Richard's life were treated in such a way so that they themselves didn't actually matter.
yeah.
And I'm speaking specifically of Marianne.
Hmm.
There's no way that she felt like she mattered,
Yeah.
had to marry this man.
Hmm.
So this little girl that is his 10th child named Mary Ellen, I can only assume that like that would make her feel like she didn't matter.
Well, and it seems especially sinister if he used it as a way to keep her in line.
Yeah.
Like you better shape up or I'm, giving you, in the next round of tithing. All
So
right. Yeah,
yeah,
what's
I
next?
know. It's just these little things that I'm just and
Yeah.
but to me they're not little. To me they're like anyway. Um okay, so it goes on, it talks about everybody's age. So like in the 1870 census, Richard was 39, Elizabeth was 35, Marianne was 24. At this point, his third wife had already passed away, but his children were ages 16, 14, 11, 5, 3, 1. I'm sure you noticed that big gap between 11 and
Mm,
5. Those
hmm
are Elizabeth's children. And then from Marianne, there's his children are 7, 4, and 2. And then he did have his son Joseph Eldridge, which is the only child from his third wife. But he at the time was not on this particular, I think they wrote him down on the census, but he wasn't actually living with them. He was living with his Eldridge grandparents.
Yeah.
Eldridges were neighbors of the Robinsons, so it's not like he lived far away from his father. But he was being raised in the home of his grandparents, not
hmm
the home of
hmm
all those other kids. So it seems to me that they had, because later, Richard chooses um, one son from each of his wives to handle his estate.
hmm
Robert, our second great grandfather, was chosen from Mary Ann's kids. He is the oldest boy,
hmm
and a child from Elizabeth, and then Joseph Eldridge Robinson, the only child born to his third wife. All three of them are in charge of his estate. And so later, when I was reading through things, it was clear that Joseph Eldridge was definitely part of this family, but he was being raised primarily by his Eldridge grandparents,
Yeah.
incorporated into the Robinson family
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So in March of 1874, the Pinto Ward was organized into the United Order, which is this law of consecration, which
Hmm.
is basically Mormon religious communism.
Communism. Yeah.
And the bishop would be in charge of accepting everything from people and then distributing everything out to people.
hmm
It says tithing was often paid in livestock, increasing a good-sized herd under the management of, and it just names some people that managed the cattle underneath Richard Robinson. And then it says the church was shifting some of their operations to a new community called Canab. And then it says in the spring of 1876, excuse me, some of the cattle was moved to Canab, about 30 miles north. Um, oh, sorry. Some of the cattle was moved to Canab, just east of the present town of Alton, and I don't know where that is. And Richard was called to take charge of the operation, milking 150 cows. So he then moves his family away from Pinto to this community of Canab, and that's when his family leaves Pinto, and then over the next several years, all the rest of the families leave too, and then Pinto today is not really even a community.
hmm
So the photograph I showed you several weeks ago of Pinto, that was taken in 1875. The Robinson family leaves just 1 year later.
Okay.
1876 is also the year that Richard has to go testify at John D. Lee's trial. So that is happening here at the same time. Dennis doesn't mention that at all. I don't know if that's on purpose or not. I don't know.
Well, given his thoroughness in everything else, and given how much he is willing to talk about minor supporting details,
Mhm.
the fact that he leaves out a major, I mean, come on, he's in Utah in the 1800s, and he has to travel to Washington, D.C.
No, no, no. The trial was in Beaver, Utah,
Okay,
which
so
is
what's that distance?
it's about halfway between Pinto and Salt Lake City.
So we're talking 50
So
miles?
so I don't know, but today maybe it would be, give me a second to look it up. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know. But
Yeah.
so it's about a 5 hour drive from
Okay.
where they're at now to Salt Lake City, and it's about halfway through. So like 2.5 hour drive today, much more than 50 miles, I would.
So by horse or wagon, it's going to be a multi-day journey.
Yes.
And that's not even including the amount of time he has to be there and involved with the court case. So he could have been away for a couple of weeks.
I would assume so.
So, and again, 1800s, the patriarch of the house being away for several weeks. I assume by that point he still has a lot of clout and responsibility in the town.
100%.
Okay, so again, this is as if the mayor of a town has to go away for several weeks and then The historian never bothers to mention it.
Well, I mean, this family historian never bothers to mention it. He
So,
does say here, at 11 a.m. on the 23rd of March, 1877, John D. Lee was executed for his role at the massacre.
so again, he
But he,
chose to talk about Lee's end
yeah,
and chose to not talk at all about the part that Richard played in it.
Richard testified at his trial. Like
Yeah.
it's such a big
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he doesn't mention it. So yeah, he leaves Pinto. Canab is part of Kane County. It is far enough away from. Cousin Dennis talks about how he can only assume that Richard must have been glad, to get away from that area where the Mountain Meadow Massacre happened. But that's really all he says. So they
Well, and
are.
that's also just his conjecture. We have no idea if he was glad to get away from it.
Yeah, exactly. So they moved to Canab. And he runs a dairy. He takes care of all of these cattle. Again, they're not his. They belong to the
Yeah.
church.
Yeah.
That's the family's living. They have good enough income, even though he doesn't own any of this. He still gets a pretty good income. It says he was a fine businessman. In addition to cattle and horses, by the fall of 1877, the ranch where they were living anticipated 1,000 bushels of wheat, 1,500 bushels of potatoes, and 5 tons of cheese. So it was a very much a family-run business, but it wasn't just for them, it was for the whole community. But he was able to build his family a home that was nice enough or that could be big enough where he actually built. It's described like there's a wing for each of his wives. Like Marianne has one wing and
Yeah.
Elizabeth
Yeah.
has the other. And a lot of this he's just talking about Richard's business dealings and aren't particularly interesting to me outside of like, oh, huh, interesting. It's just his business dealing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm still in my head as I was reading through this the first time, I was like, I want to know about, Marianne and kind of what her life was like. Now, during all of these years, she is continuing to give birth to children. We know that she starts dealing with some very significant mental health issues. It isn't really described until, and I want to get to this part. It talks about how school was really limited for the kids. Let's see. One of Richard's sisters, Mary Jane, moved to Pinto, and that was kind of, I don't know, like a sad thing potentially.
Mm. Mm.
That when they left Pinto, Mary Jane and her husband stayed out there. Now, this is an interesting thing about Mary Jane, Richard's younger sister. She could never have any of her own children.
Mm.
And her husband took a second wife, had 2 children, and then she died and Mary Jane raised these 2 children just as her own
Mm.
children. And that was
Mm.
her, like she got to be their mother kind of a thing.
Mm.
And I found that very interesting because one of the things that syphilis can cause is infertility in women.
Mm.
So I was like,
Mm.
huh, we don't know, but that's interesting. So, um, okay, so I want to just skip to the next little chapter. Okay, let me read through a couple of these things. As the years passed, news of events from the outside world penetrated even to places unlisted on most maps, places like Pinto or Canab. Geronimo had recently surrendered. Apache troubles were at an end. The Navajo had taken their long walk to Bosque Redondo nearly 20 years earlier and were now back home on their traditional lands. And although its erection was still 30 years away in 1856, when the Eccles and Eldridge families sailed into New York Harbor, the Statue of Liberty was dedicated in 1886. The following year, Richard's old neighbor, John Taylor, died, and the year after that, the Mentai Temple was completed. He says, we may hide from the world for a while, yet the world goes on. So he's just kind of naming some world events out in the world that were happening in the background. It says that in September of 1887, Richard's youngest and last child, Harley, died at 14 months old. Parley's mother, Marianne, already suffering from serious health issues, cannot have been helped any by this event, is what he said. And Parley is the one where I was like, he died. We weren't sure, but then I looked and saw that his brother, just older, Hiram, when he was an adult, his first three children died.
Mhm.
And so that was like, oh, And so anyway, okay. So he does talk a little bit about how Richard goes up to American Fork and visits with his father Edward, and we never really kind of finished what Edward's life was like, and I'll just
Mhm.
touch on it very briefly. All of the rest of the children, Richard's siblings, stayed up in that area. So it was
Mhm.
definitely like Richard's family in southern Utah. So there were the southern Utah Robinsons, and then there were the northern Utah Robinsons who were
Mhm.
there in American Fork, which is, south of Salt Lake City. It's interesting because, we theorize that Edward potentially chose not to practice polygamy. What happened to Mary Smith, his wife that took her own life.
Mhm. Mhm.
What's really interesting to me is that none of his sons that stayed in that area practiced polygamy.
Mhm.
Except, there is one exception. His son that was born to Anne, his second wife, did practice polygamy, but it was not but like I don't ever think it's okay. But it was like he married a woman, she was blind and had some health problems, and then he married a second wife, and then like within a like 1 or 2 years his first wife passed away, like she was infertile, she had some health issues. So it was still polygamy. I still don't agree with it.
Mhm.
But the way it was is described, and not just here, there were some other places, the way that setup was described, it was like this woman, she needed a lot of help, and but she still like helped with the children that were born to the second wife, but she didn't live very long. And then he never married another woman. He just had the one wife and raised those kids. So there is one exception. He did practice polygamy for a short time until that wife, her health was bad, she passed away. But Edward had a lot of other sons, and none of them practiced polygamy,
Mhm.
except for Richard. And I just think it's interesting,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. So anyway, Edward lives his life out up there. He becomes kind of famous in the community for his flowers. The corner where his house was at, they called it Robinson's Rose Corner or something like that because he was famous for his roses. One of his granddaughters talks about how Brigham Young was friends with Edward and visited, of course, Edward in their home in England, and then visited Edward in their home in Nauvoo, and visited
Wow.
Edward in his home in American Fork.
Wow.
So it was very much a thing. Anytime Brigham Young was driving through American Fork, he stopped and would go visit with his friend Edward from back
Mhm.
England.
Mhm.
And so, it's just interesting.
Yeah.
So, and Edward was refusing to practice polygamy. I mean, it's just interesting, I
Well,
don't know.
yeah, it is. I mean, and again, it kind of reiterates, what we have said, which is that it is possible for people to have a sense of what's right and wrong
And
outside of their religious pressures,
make their own choices.
make their own choices.
So
And
I know.
so, yeah, when I hear people offer justifications like, well, this was just the times, this is, how things were. It's like, well, I mean, we're all influenced by the environment we grow up in, but we never lose our ability to notice what's right and wrong.
And that I just go back to that every time. There were
Yeah,
people who stood up against
yeah,
slavery. There were
yeah,
people who
yeah.
stood up against polygamy. There were men who helped with the suffragette movement.
Mhm.
There were,
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah. Okay. So I want to get back to, so that's just a little bit about, because he had all those sons. He raised Anne's sons that were Wooten boys. He raised them. They
Hmm.
even took in
Hmm.
an adopted daughter
Hmm.
that was younger than all the other kids. And there's no really information other than that she's listed and it says adopted. She has a different last name, but
Hmm.
Anne
Hmm.
adopted this little girl and raised her. So, Edward just lived his life out there up
Yeah,
in American Fork, and it
yeah.
seems like he was a good citizen and a good person, and the community loved him, and he was friends with Brigham Young, and they built a statue to him after he died, and it's just interesting. So,
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah.
but But yeah, Richard went to southern Utah and definitely practiced polygamy and had so many kids that it you would think having only one child in southern Utah compared to all the other kids. I'm not saying it was an equal number of Robinsons in southern Utah as northern Utah, but it was a lot closer than you might think it would be because he had
Mm,
23 children.
yeah.
And then when they all had kids, so like by the third generation, there was a lot of Robinsons in southern.
Hmm. Hmm.
So okay, so now we're going to get into the toward the end of Richard's life. Uh, I know where I want to. Oh, I better start up here actually. Okay, so this is what cousin Dennis says about Richard. This chapter is called End of the Trail. Um, and some of these details I skipped, but he had different business dealings, they had different
Yeah.
goals.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be mentioning some things that I didn't touch on before, but they're not super important, so I'm just
Right. Right.
So Richard sold his ranch in the upper part of Canab, but soon after purchased another ranch in a part of the area called Sink Valley, which was not very far away, where his boys ran the new ranch, and they're grown men at this point, and a lot of them are running this ranch for him. In the lower part of Canab, Richard owned a large brick home complete with outbuildings, including a blacksmith shop behind the house where the boys slept when they were in town. Elizabeth used one side of the house, and Marianne used the other side of the house. Sometimes one of the wives would stay at this other ranch elsewhere. So he was successful. He had several homes and a lot of children that were grown. A lot of grown daughters were married, grown sons that were working on the ranches. At an age now when his children were marrying and friends were dying, Richard learned that old missionary associate Jacob Hamlin had passed away in New Mexico. Passage of the 1887 Edmunds-Tucker Bill by Congress threatened all polygamous husbands, including Richard, with fines, imprisonment, and more or less continuous worry about their families if it happened. A man could not feed his family from a jail cell. With other locals, and he just named some of the other men in the community who were also polygamists. Every rumor of a federal lawman in the vicinity sent Richard on evasive forays to sleep in the canyons. So he would flee up into the mountains to hide from the authorities who were coming through trying to arrest the polygamists.
Leaving his wives to fend for themselves. All right.
The resulting nervous strain helped break Richard's health, and he was released as bishop in 1889. So, I mean, he's been serving as a bishop at this point for 30 plus years in various communities. It says it's the first time in more than 32 years he wasn't presiding over his congregation and community. And then it says announcement of the 24th September 1890. Let me say all that again. Announcement of the 1890 manifesto by President Wilford Woodruff certainly didn't ease Richard's mind concerning his family, and an explanation for Never Mormons. The federal government was putting so much pressure on the Mormons to stop practicing polygamy that eventually the church prophet, who at this point in 1890 is a man named Wilford Woodruff, writes this manifesto and announces to the world that Mormons will no longer be practicing polygamy. But it wasn't true. There were a lot of Mormons who were still practicing polygamy. They just started hiding it. Even from
Yeah, the top church leaders were hiding it. So it's not like you had, hardcore members who just were disobeying the prophet. No, they were doing it with the consent of the leadership.
100%. And it's one thing for somebody who has been married to two women for the last 30 years, and they have raised or are raising children together, and they all live together in a
Mhm.
family home or whatever. I don't think it's right, but I'm trying to look at it from that perspective. This is their family for the last 30 years.
Yeah,
Some of these, wives are probably ailing, and like what are these men going to do? Going to put them out on the street? Like it is a
right.
tough situation.
Sure. Yeah,
And I
sure.
don't like I don't want these women to not be taken care of.
No,
So
yeah,
I get that, and that's really tough, but the church leaders were still marrying people into
yeah.
polygamy after 1890.
Yeah, no, it would have been unethical for those husbands at that moment to say, "Oh, the government said we can't do it, so I'm divorcing you." That would have
Exactly.
been wrong. That would have been, I mean, that would have been abandoning their wives.
Yep.
The point is, it never should have happened in the first place.
Exactly.
Um, but yeah, what continues to be bothersome is, again, that Mormon leaders, like so many religious people, they really don't believe that they have a responsibility to obey the law. They really think they're exempt. They really think that God has given them permission to do what they want.
That
And
manifesto
so,
was issued to get the attack dogs to back down,
yeah,
not to actually change what Mormons
yeah,
were doing.
that's right. Yeah.
And it says here, discussion and debate raged throughout Mormon society as to what the manifesto really meant and to whom it was directed, as well as what decisions should be made or actions taken by those who loved and lived with more than one wife. And
Well,
then
it makes me realize I've never actually read that manifesto. I wonder if it is full of the kind of lawyerly language that Mormon leaders nowadays are so renowned for, and going back to our earlier discussion about Brigham Young, using particular idioms so that he could say what he wants to say without, it being able to be pinned on him later. It would be, yeah, I'd be curious to actually read that.
I'm going to look at it right now. Official declaration to whom it may concern. Press dispatch, press, as in PRESS, press dispatches having been sent for political purposes from Salt Lake City, which have been widely published to the effect that the Utah Commission, in their recent report to the Secretary of the Interior, alleged that plural marriages, this is not the manifesto. Oh, no, it is. I'm sorry, it is. Let me find where I was at. Allege that plural marriages are still being solemnized and that 40 or more such marriages have been contracted since last June or during the past year. Also, that in public discourses, the leaders of the church have taught, encouraged, and urged the continuance of the practice of polygamy. I, therefore, as president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, do hereby, in the most solemn manner, declare that these charges are false. We are not teaching polygamy or plural marriage, nor permitting any person to enter into its practice. And I deny, oh, it's cut off. Basically, he's denying.
So yeah, so they lied about it in the beginning to traffic, women and families to Utah, and then they lied about it again to avoid uh, prosecution by the federal government.
Yep. So I found it. We are not teaching polygamy, or plural marriage, nor permitting any person to enter into its practice. And I deny that either 40 or any other number of plural marriages have, during that period, been solemnized in our temples or in any other place in the territory.
Right. Which we know is a lie.
Which we know is an outright lie.
And eventually, and I don't remember the details, eventually a second manifesto needed to be said to the membership because they realized the membership had no one among the membership believed that they were sincere.
So the second manifesto was in 1904. And the reason why they had to come out with a second manifesto, I believe the second manifesto was put out by the next church president, church prophet,
Mhm.
which was
Mhm.
Joseph Fielding Smith.
Mhm.
Um, because at that point, the federal government said, if you don't do what we say and stop. Actually, let me take a step back. Utah had been trying to become a state for a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And they issued this manifesto that said, we don't practice polygamy anymore in the year 1890. And then they were successfully able to become a state in 1896. Okay. And so all of that had been agreed upon and worked out. And then the federal government quickly figures out that even though they followed through on their half of the deal and allowed Utah to become a state, the Mormons were still practicing polygamy.
Yeah.
And so their response was, okay, if you do not stop practicing polygamy, we are going to come in and we are going to seize all of your assets. And I have heard it said that that was the closest moment in history to the church completely shutting down.
Yeah. Well,
How that would have changed history, huh?
yeah. And what little this was talked about when we were young, it was framed in a particular way that it was framed as persecution,
Oh, yeah.
right? It was framed as, the church kept trying to comply with the federal government's wishes, but the federal government was just never satisfied and just kept coming down on them again and again and again. Rather than the government said, if you want to be a state, you can. You just have to follow these rules. And the church said, okay, we follow the rules. And then the government 5 years later finds out, oh no, that was all a lie.
Mhm.
They didn't follow the rules.
Yep.
This was all a ploy to
Mhm.
become a state and then start receiving all of these benefits,
Yep.
from the government. And
So, yeah,
so, yeah, this idea that it was the federal government persecuting them rather than the federal government saying, "Hey, we had a deal.
yeah,
You have failed to keep up your end of the bargain, and now you're contractually obligated to do something about that."
exactly.
So,
And
yeah.
so, yeah, they became a state in 1896. And then um, the next prophet of the church, Joseph Fielding Smith, had to issue the second manifesto, which he did
Mm,
so in 1904. And the reason why was because the church was literally about to be raided and all of
yeah.
their property confiscated by the
Yeah.
federal government because they were so blatantly and out in the open breaking the law
Hmm.
as a people, as a
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
But rewind 14 years to when the first manifesto came out, and the church members are like, wait, what? What do you mean
Hmm.
we don't practice polygamy anymore? Like, we have these wives.
Hmm.
And so this is what happens with Richard and his family in particular. Early one calm Sunday morning in the summer of 1891, federal marshal Federal marshals McGreary and Armstrong found Richard at home and placed him under arrest. Richard, ever the gracious host, invited them into his home to dine, served the officials a wonderful meal, and gave his word of honor he would appear before the next scheduled court convened at Beaver. So again, it's this
Hmm.
trip he has to take. Along with 5 of his children who had also been subpoenaed to accompany him because they would make family members testify
Hmm.
against the polygamist.
Yeah.
Sometimes the wives would have to, and in this case, he has adult children, and they are being called to the stand to tell the truth about
Hmm.
what's happening in your family.
Yeah.
At court, the judge allowed Richard to represent himself. Richard related how he struggled to provide for a family he loved dearly and about the considerable, sorry, and about the considerable expenses incurred caring for his wife Marianne. He probably noted how each member of the family would suffer in his absence. He pled his case sincerely, intently, and ultimately successfully. The judge told him, "Go home to your family. Take care of your invalid wife and your children. You are a free man." Richard was released without time or fine.
Yeah. Well, there's no better solution to that situation.
It
That,
doesn't help anyone for him to be in jail.
yeah,
The injustice is that it happened in the first place.
in the
Like you said,
first place. Yeah.
at
Yeah.
this point, it's too late to save Marianne from polygamy.
Yeah.
She's in her 50s. She is suffering from mental illness. Not having her husband alive to bring in money for the family
Hmm.
only harms her.
Yeah. Well, and no, the moral tactic would have been um, to essentially just decree that everybody who's already participated in polygamy is just grandfathered into the new law, right? And from that point on, anyone who engages in plural marriage, as in they marry a new woman after they understand that it's illegal, and any bishop or any, city magistrate who approves it, those are the people who are then punished. But it appears that they took the tactic of finding the men who had already been plural married for 20 or 30 years and coming after them.
Yes, and that because quite literally, and there are so many stories of a husband put in that position would choose which wife he was keeping.
Yeah, I mean,
The other,
they're creating abandonment. So, yeah.
and so for that, and again, I always want to be fair and give credit where credit is due. Richard went to court and risked being arrested
Mhm.
rather than
Yeah.
abandoned. And I have to give him credit for that.
Hmm.
Because there were men who did literally abandon one of the wives
Yeah.
who didn't provide for them once they
Mhm.
realized, ooh, I'm at risk of going to jail. Sorry, sweetie. Sorry,
Yeah.
kiddos. I'm gonna go live with this wife that I like better than you.
Well, and I mean, maybe this is too dark. I wonder what the percentage of choosing the younger wife was.
Mm, yeah, guaranteed. I
Yeah.
think it was very high. So he again he kind of just talks about some of the different businesses, some of the things that his kids do. They marry this person, they marry that person.
Mm. Yeah.
Richard continued to work really hard in the community. Um, his father, Edward, passed away at American Fork, I believe in 1896 or 7. I think it was around the time Utah became a state. And then it says Elizabeth was struggling because her health started to deteriorate also. And I learned a couple things because we were wondering about Elizabeth's health toward the end of her life. Like she didn't go to an insane asylum like
Mm.
Marianne
Mhm.
did, but there were some things I found out, so I'll touch on that. Elizabeth was struggling, and Marianne's health deteriorating for several years was becoming much worse. Richard sought medical advice throughout the territory, but no one seemed to be able to make much of a difference. Marianne did all she was capable of doing and more, but the primary burden of household chores and homemaking duties fell more and more upon Elizabeth, who was herself feeling the cumulative strains of aging and endless labor. After raising 12 children of her own and assuming a heavy obligation to care for Marianne and the other children as if they were hers, Elizabeth seemed to wear out. Her health failed, and she became helpless as a child. Married daughter Blanche moved in to care for her mother and also attend to Marianne's needs, cook meals, and assist grandkids. And then shortly afterward, Elizabeth died at age 64 in February of 1899. And it says that Blanche moved in for a little while to continue to care for the family in the way that Elizabeth couldn't after she died.
And so
So
Elizabeth was his original wife.
his first wife.
Okay.
I thought it was really interesting because 64, yes, I understand that life physically was harder back then. 64 was older then than it is now,
Yeah.
um, in regard to how worn out a body was.
Mhm.
Um, I thought it was really interesting that it said that Elizabeth was as helpless as a child when she passed away. That made me wonder about syphilis. Like wonder
Mhm.
like how did it plague her body that
Yeah.
potentially led to like physical being helpless as a child. It's one thing for someone to be, physically disabled when they're elderly and they can't get up and move around as much. That doesn't mean that their mind has changed very much. Maybe they forget some things, but for the most part, right, they're there. Helpless as a child to me sounds like cognitive decline.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that also made me wonder maybe Elizabeth ended up developing dementia,
Mm.
which is a part of syphilis.
Yeah.
Again, you can have it without, but with all those other indications of syphilis, we can't think for a minute that if she had dementia, syphilis didn't contribute to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. So that's how Elizabeth died. And the way that this is described, this is what I was talking about several weeks ago when I was making reference to how much compassion Dennis talks about the women, but makes no mention of, but he talks about it as though how life ended up for them was inevitable.
Hmm.
No mention of how Richard's choices led to what they ended up going through.
Yeah.
Um, that to me is painful, just reading about these women. And, Elizabeth's health had been deteriorating for years. What's not, for one, he doesn't talk. Well, actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to keep reading and then I'm going to say what I was going to say. Okay, so Blanche, her daughter, so Blanche is Elizabeth's last three children were girls. Blanche is the second to last child. On the record, her name is Sarah Blanche Robinson. And as I've talked about Elizabeth's kids, I've always said Sarah, but then I figured out later she didn't go by Sarah, she went by Blanche.
Hmm.
So it's Elizabeth, Blanche is Elizabeth's second to youngest daughter, and Blanche moved in for a little while to kind of take care of her mother, and then when her mother passed away, she stayed for a little while to help the household because some of Marianne's children are still at home. They're not old enough to be married and gone yet. After Elizabeth's death, Richard appeared to lose much of his interest in life, and his own decline accelerated. He had already lost two wives, and Marianne's emotional health was diminishing to the point she would soon be placed in an institution. And then in what, sorry, hold on. Okay. And then in what Richard and remaining wife Marianne surely considered a difficult and painful year, their son James Hardman Robinson died at age 21. So when I was talking about how Marianne's youngest baby died, the child just older than him when he was grown, his first three babies died. And then the child just older than him died when he was like 20. And I was like, I can't figure out how he died. That is this child that died at 21, James Hardman Robinson. I've looked for death records. I can't find anything. If he took his own life, that screams, more of this syphilis that had invaded their family. Listen, he could have gotten sick. He could have been kicked by a
Yeah.
horse. It could have been anything, and I don't know.
This was still late 1800s, right?
Yeah,
I
this
mean,
is
it's,
the year 1899.
yeah, I mean, this is like, it's barely not the Old West
Yeah,
anymore.
exactly. But
There's a
I
million ways to die.
a million ways he could have died, and that's why like I really wanted to figure it out to see if it was something that seemed like mental health related.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't have any evidence of it because I can't find a death record.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So then it says the following summer in June of 1900 in the census it lists Richard as 69 years old and he's still listed as a working farmer. But Marianne is listed as a 55-year-old and she's an invalid. Her downhill slide grew steeper, and family members became concerned as she would hurt herself or someone else. The decision to confine her cannot have been an easy one, and it was simply the last resort in a desperate situation. During one episode, which I would assume means a seizure, during one episode, Marianne fell into the fire, severely burning herself.
Mhm.
Her seizures became more frequent and increasingly severe, and the pains suffered were not hers alone. And what he shares next tells me that he pulled the same record that I did, that I shared from the hospital. So I
Yeah,
was like, okay, so he did actually look into it.
okay.
Um, on December 13th, 1901, Richard signed an affidavit certified 10 days later and then he lists the doctors, and witnessed by a neighbor. The diagnosis that Marianne Eccles Robinson was insane would place her in the state insane asylum, then an imposing and frightening place. Um, and it was called the Territorial Insane Asylum. And then it talks about the judge that signed everything. He talks about the unhappy trek north. And I guess I just assumed from the paperwork that men showed up at her house and took her away.
Yeah.
But Dennis says that Richard and Marianne traveled up to Provo.
Hmm.
So Richard and Marianne arrived at the asylum in Provo on Christmas Eve, carrying the required affidavit, physician certificate, and warrant of commitment. Excuse me. Marianne Robinson of Canab, age 57, was number 1122. Um, that was her assigned number. Was thereupon admitted to a lonely place of sadness she would leave only when dead, 4.5 years later. And then, I mean, Dennis, I appreciate his how somber his words are because
Yeah.
it is so this has been so heavy for me. And as I read through this, and I loved what he said. I loved how he talked about the Robinsons and Edward and his honesty about Mary Smith killing herself. And but then I was so disgruntled through, a lot of how he described Richard. But, as I'm reading through this part, again, like I can feel his sadness for Marianne. But I guess what I long for is an acknowledgement that it didn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
And that's what never happens.
Yeah.
So it says Marianne Robinson of Canab was admitted to a lonely place of sadness, which she would leave only when dead, 4.5 years later. How tragic for her, he says. How tragic for the family. And then he says, some Christmas. The physician's certificate states Marianne had suffered from epilepsy since about 1876, when she would have been age 32, which I thought was interesting because I don't know if you remember, but way back when we were looking at dates and trying to figure things out, you were like 25 years, so 32, So
Mhm.
that is what that says, that from age 32. Now she had a lot more children after age
Yeah.
32, so she was still
Yeah.
expected to be that kind of a companion to Richard,
Hmm.
and she was still giving birth to children. So, it's just anyway.
Well, I can't help but notice that Richard's treatment of all of this is so on par with the rhetoric that we heard growing up, which was a lot of sympathy for the long sufferingness of women,
And it's
accompanied by a complete failure to hold any of the men accountable for why the women suffered. And that seems he seems to have put that very Mormon perspective right into his historical descriptions.
absolutely. No, you said Richard, but I know you meant
I'm
Dennis.
sorry, I'm sorry. Dennis. Yes, Dennis.
It's fine.
Um,
But you're absolutely right. And that's what feels so painful to me because I
yeah.
read this as a woman. Like, I cannot help but to read this outside of a female perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, he is filled with sympathy, but
Yeah.
there's no acknowledgement of
Yeah.
how.
And, I have images in my mind of all the descriptions of, Mormon pioneer women suffering, crossing the plains and helping to build Utah communities and all of this.
And they're so admired. It's such an
Yeah.
admirable quality for women to have, to be long suffering.
Yeah.
Who does that benefit?
Yeah, exactly. And even today, that word long suffering is a trigger word for me. I hear that, and I hear it in contexts unrelated to Mormonism, and my mind immediately goes back to Mormon pioneer women. So,
That benefited men.
yeah.
Let's see how much you can suffer. You will be blessed in the eternities for it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and I also can't help but notice that Richard managed for how many decades to keep two full households worth of people, fed and clothed and sheltered. He managed to take a third wife, and we assume would have done the same for her
Another
had
kind of
she lived. He managed to essentially run a small platoon of children. And after decades of that experience, it was too much to keep
yeah.
his ailing wife comfortable, right? It was too much to arrange for a bit of care for her. at home, after all of that logistical experience,
Mhm.
after being the default mayor of a town, after managing herds of livestock, after all of that, one frail, ailing woman was too much for him.
Yes, and um, I don't think he was like an extraordinarily rich man, but I think he had means to hire somebody,
Yeah,
even if none of the children felt like they could do it, like hiring somebody to come in and care for
yeah,
her. Yeah. And Dennis goes into quite a bit of detail. It's clear that he pulled all of those records that I pulled. It looks like he pulled
mm,
some that I didn't because he talks about
mm,
he gained access to like a death notice. On the notice it says let me read exactly. Of every sorrowful fact uncovered at the Provo facility, by far the saddest piece of information is that Marianne died at that place 19 July 1906, and then it says alone, as in like
yeah,
it says it right on the record. I don't know if it because he doesn't have the actual record, but I don't know if it said like who accompanied her, who was with whatever. It was like
yeah,
alone. She was,
yeah. Nobody was in the room with her. Nobody holding her hand as she passed.
and I assume they came in and found her.
Yeah. No, I mean, of course, it is important not to, hoist unjustified condemnations. We don't know if anybody had been visiting her at the time.
Yeah.
We don't know actually what happened. Maybe she had been visited recently and she died in her sleep, and it was just technically true that she was alone when she died, and we needn't read any more into it than that. Um,
I do have a question though, because the cause of death is status epilepticus, which
hmm,
means an ongoing seizure.
yeah,
A seizure begins and never ends,
it never ends.
and the person dies.
Um,
Now, can that be determined post-mortem at that time? I know today they could, but
mhm.
they find her dead later and determine that it was from a seizure. Now, there could be what frothing at the mouth, there could be
Yeah,
injuries on her body that were consistent with, oh, those weren't there,
yeah, the night before, the day before. Yeah,
exactly. So I assume that there potentially were ways that could that epilep status epilepticus could be identified as the cause of death
mm,
postmortem. So, but maybe there were people in the room, and maybe that alone means she didn't have family there with her.
yeah,
Maybe some of the nurses or the attendants were witnessing the seizure that they couldn't stop, and
yeah.
that I don't know any of those details.
Right, right.
Um,
Yeah, and it's likely none of those details were ever recorded. There's no record of it. I'm sure. I mean, based on the photo we looked at the size of that institution, there would have been hundreds of residents there, patients. And I'm sure, record keeping, it's just like get the paperwork done, fill in the blank. So we don't know what was in, who was in the room when she died. But
and
either way, she didn't die in her own bed in her own house, surrounded by her children.
and it's just really painful considering that it's possible she had these health conditions because her bishop husband gave her syphilis. Like
Yeah.
that, I mean, it's just such a gut punch. Dennis describes her a little bit. Again, the sympathy continues. He says, kind of like an overview of her life. She had given birth to 7 children while residing at Pinto. After the family moved to Canab, 3 more children were born at the ranch. Anne was said to have been quite tall and slender, just under 100 pounds, and very attractive. But as she aged, she became frail and thin due to her poor health. So this is how the end of Richard's life is described. After leaving Marianne at Provo, a despondent Richard, which I don't know how Dennis knows that,
Yeah.
a despondent Richard badly needing a change of thinking badly needing a change and thinking one might do him some good. Again, I don't know how Dennis knows that. Traveled to Manassas, Colorado, excuse me, to stay with his daughter Annie. But the cold winter weather only further impaired his health, and his heart began to trouble him. Returning to Utah, he stopped at Panguitch to see a doctor. The doctor advised Richard that his condition was very serious and counseled him to attend at once to his mortal affairs, as he could die any time. Richard rode home through the land he loved for the last time, arriving home at the ranch to dictate his will, drafted by his son, Joseph Eldridge Robinson, who was the only son born to his third wife. And there, at age 71 and a half, beneath a vivid blue sky and pink cliffs of Bryce Canyon, he died May 8th, 1902. Joseph, Robert, and so Robert is our second great-grandfather. Joseph, Robert, and Heber, so these are each of the sons that he picked from each of the wives. One son from each of Richard's three wives were appointed executors of the estate. Rarely is there total trust, goodwill, and unanimity in division of property, but it was so in this family. Letters passed simultaneously in the mail, wherein each of the brothers consented to whatever division the others felt fair. All-knowing honesty and integrity would prevail. Eventually, Heber distributed the family estate, and all heirs immediately agreed. So maybe it
That's
happened.
great. Yeah, that's great. But
If it was that blissful, great.
yeah. Uh,
Um, Again, it's just the pedestalizing,
well, yes, and I'm sure you're just like me, My Mormon rhetoric detector is so finely tuned. Whenever someone is engaging in this kind of hagiography, my detector just goes off like an air raid klaxon. And that's what that sounds like.
It seems to me that if it was peacefully settled, it wouldn't need to be said that it was peacefully settled.
Or if it was peacefully settled, you just say they peacefully settled it.
That's right.
It's all you have to say. But going on and on about the, rightness and fairness prevailing and blah, 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 it just, yeah, yeah,
Almost like it makes me wonder if he's gaslighting, like he's saying, if you think it happened in any other way, it didn't. It was
yeah,
peaceful.
yeah,
But I don't know. I don't know.
yeah.
So then, this is the very last paragraph. It says, and so Richard's life came to an end, though his story goes on and on. Our patchwork lives are stitched to fit patterns of our own time. The present economy encourages specialization, a narrow focus that sometimes results in narrow thinking. Richard was not the only 19th century pioneer who was broad in perception and proficient in the performances of several trades, but, quote, Singing Dick Robinson was also blessed with strength and a particularly industrious nature. When he was young, he said he never knew what it was to be tired.
Hmm.
His son, if Eldridge recalled, father was a natural comedian and actor, sang well also, was a good speaker, a fine farmer, dairyman, blacksmith, mason, carpenter, etc., as pioneers usually had to be versatile and provide for themselves homemade utilities. And I take that back. That was not the last paragraph, although we are pretty much done with
Yeah.
Richard's. It just talks about, how this is how he ends it. All the lovely lost things can be heart-wrenching indeed, but everything forgotten becomes meaningless, and what we remember means everything, like thunder echoing and re-echoing through mountain canyons before gradually vanishing into the embracing hills. Richard Robinson's grasp of goodness and happiness reaches out to us across the years.
Wow.
His contagious laugh reverberates warmly in our hearts.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he's a lovely writer.
Well, he is. Yeah, I mean, he's an evocative writer. His imagery is very good. His turns of phrase.
Mhm.
are noticeable. I mean, they're noticeable for their quality of the language use. But he's slathering on, at the end there. That's very rosy colored at the end.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, maybe this is my cynical brain, but engaging in that kind of thing at the end does feel indicative, so.
Yeah. It does have his will here, and I won't read everything, but there's a couple of things that are interesting. The first thing that he requests is that his body be modestly and decently buried at Canab beside my wife Elizabeth.
Mm,
And then he had already named his executors, which are these three sons. And then he says, I direct that my executors hereinafter named, as soon as they have sufficient funds in their hands, pay my funeral expenses and the expenses of my last sickness and all my just and lawful debts. Um, he says, third, I direct that sufficient means for the proper care and burial of my wife, Marianne Robinson, now an inmate of the State Insane Asylum, be paid out of the income of my personal and real estate. And when she departs this life, if practicable, that she also be interred at Canab. And it is my desire that a fitting monument bearing my name and the names of my wives
mm, mm.
be inscribed thereon, and it be erected over my tomb. And then it talks about the splitting of assets between all of his living children. So, all in all, he had 23 children, but when he died, 17 of them were living. So, he did have six children pass before.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of them, John Wooten Robinson, took his own life months after his father died. So he's on this list, but we know that he takes his own life eventually.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's how Richard's life comes to conclusion. I'm gonna take a minute to describe two of his children to you, but before I do that, I just want to give you a chance to say whatever you want to say about Richard.
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about him. I don't want to, tread ground we've already walked across. I guess I'll just simply say that probably during most years of his life, he doesn't seem to be much different than any other man of his time, or at least any man, of his time and place. He seems very typical of a Mormon pioneer man. Um, when I think of other men of the time who were able to be more knowledgeable and understanding of the world, it's easy for me to criticize him. But compared to the other men around him, I don't know that he was worse than anyone else.
I don't think so. I also don't think he was better than anyone else. Like, I think
Yeah,
he's very typical of that kind of a Mormon man.
yeah,
From, and really, when I take a step back and look at him, I, I don't, I don't think he was a terrible human being.
yeah,
But my point is, let's talk about what caused trauma that we inherited.
yeah,
So again, I claim immunity to presentism.
mhm,
I'm not here to determine if Richard was a good man or a bad man according to the social expectations of that time. I want to talk about what happened in his life or what choices he made in his life that caused either his wives or his children trauma that we then inherited so that we can make sure that those family traditions of behaviors aren't passed down.
yeah,
And and listen, I'm not, for one, I'm not a psychologist. I'm also not a historian. We've established that. I'm not even claiming as we go through talking about the lives of all of these people that I have particular insight into what
yeah, hmm,
I'm not even trying to determine that.
yeah,
I just want us to start talking about the past, start talking about history through the lens of generational
hmm,
trauma
hmm,
so that these conversations can be had in not just our family, not just maybe other people that descend from Richard Robinson, but anybody may be in need of this kind of understanding.
Mm.
Let's talk about what really happened. Let's not sugarcoat things. I
Mhm.
have not, maybe it seems like I have, but I haven't intended to paint Richard as this horrible human being.
Right.
I just think it's harmful to pedestalize him.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
then we are whitewashing the decisions that he made, even if
Mhm.
they were typical for a man of his time. Decisions that he made that harmed people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The something that is important to me as an ex-Mormon, um, is play some part in counteracting the the rosy colored lenses through which Mormons portray Mormonism. Because that was something that we all dealt with, for a long time. The notion that if you think the Mormon Church has harmed you, then you are not righteous. Then you're just wrong
You
because
haven't used the atonement to
that's
overcome your
right,
pain.
right? Or you were just offended, or all of those ways that they use to avoid the real quantifiable damage that the Mormon religion does in the minds of people and in the lives of members. Richard Robinson doesn't seem like he was an unusual man for his time, and many of the decisions he made, which hurt the people he loved, certainly had nothing to do with Mormonism.
Mhm.
Uh, but when there are alternative perspectives that one can adopt that don't require you to treat people in particular ways, that don't do damage in people's lives, um, the the justification for adopting a philosophy that requires you to do damage to people, dries up very quickly. And, thinking about his first wife and, they're living their life, as young newlyweds and as a young married couple, things appear to be going well. Their lives are hard, but, they are not suffering more than others. Right? They're living typical lives for the time. And then, one day he says, well, I have to obey the commandments, right? What was Elizabeth's reaction to that?
And I
Sure,
thought
honey, gotta obey the prophet. Let's do it, right?
and I thought about that too. Elizabeth's trauma,
Hmm.
having her husband take
Yep.
another wife, almost 10 years younger than her.
Yeah.
He's in the house
Hmm.
when he takes her into her bedroom for the
Yeah.
first time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, accompanying all of the other difficulties of their lives for him to then introduce this, right? An entirely unnecessary set of decisions, set of actions, which if he hadn't been on board with it, he wouldn't have introduced, no matter the intensity of the commandment.
His own father, his own brothers
Yeah,
did not practice polygamy.
yeah.
And they
So,
were marrying and
yeah,
having children during those decades when it was very accepted.
yeah,
They did not practice polygamy.
yeah.
He did.
So, cousin Dennis's, I mean, the only word that works here is his hagiography of Richard. Um, Whitewashes what that situation did to the women under that roof,
Yeah.
and they are our great grandmothers,
Yeah. Third,
you
Marianne is
know.
our third great grandmother.
I'm fed up with, this is all part of God's plan.
It's so harmful. That notion is so harmful.
Um,
Prevents people from standing up.
yeah, yeah, defends people from protecting themselves. It prevents people from protecting those who come after them. When some other selfish person pops up and says, "Hey, I think we should do like they used to do," it prevents people from standing up and saying, "Hell no, you're not going to do that." So it propagates trauma. It propagates psychological damage.
It create it, like you said before, it is learned helplessness, and I cannot help but to think about Elizabeth Smart back in 2002,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
out of her own bedroom in her
Mm-hmm.
parents' house as a
Mm-hmm.
14-year-old girl. And there, I mean, it made national news. I lived not in their neighborhood because they lived in a super rich neighborhood, but just less than a mile down the road were a bunch of old homes that were turned into university apartments. And I lived
Mm-hmm.
in one of those apartments. I jogged back past the turn into her fancy neighborhood when I would go running up in that area. Like I lived right there. I remember walking out of my apartment onto the street the morning after she had been taken. I didn't know what was going on. There were police everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was shocking, and so I that
Yeah.
experience for me was very real. But I remember hearing later, excuse me, hearing later people outside of the Mormon community after she was rescued 9 months later, that people were like, why in the world didn't she
Mm.
like call out? Why didn't she
Yeah.
scream? Why didn't
Yeah.
like because she was around other people so much.
Mm-hmm.
People inside, well, not inside the Mormon community, but really it's ex-Mormons and people that
Mm-hmm.
understand this toxic trait of Mormonism said, we know exactly why she
Yeah.
didn't call out. We know exactly why she didn't
Mm-hmm.
seek help
Yeah.
because she was trained to be submissive.
Yeah.
She was conditioned to be obedient.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's so many layers. And she was conditioned to believe that if, being raped, she was at fault, that type of
Yeah.
thing. Another conversation. She was raised in a culture of learned helplessness for women. 14-year-old girl, still very innocent. She grew up in a wealthy family. I don't want to say pampered, like I'm not like criticizing how they were raising her, but she was very sheltered, which
Yeah. Yeah.
great. I love that when children can be innocent for longer, but she was so innocent and so
Mm-hmm.
sheltered and so conditioned to be obedient that it was learned
Yeah.
helplessness.
Yeah.
That is Mormonism.
Yeah.
That is a Mormon woman's experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Most of us are not kidnapped by a crazy guy and
Sure.
raped and all of those things. But the reason why Elizabeth Smart experienced that the way she did and was held captive for as long as she did and did not try to escape was the same reason why so many Mormon women
Mm.
submit themselves
They
to.
just, that's, yeah. They just tolerate it.
Yep.
And them tolerating it is not, I mean, it is not a commendable thing, right? That them tolerating it is them being continuously traumatized and everyone around them tolerating their trauma.
Yep. They are
And
praised for being long suffering.
yeah, hmm yeah,
When really what's happening is they are being abused
they're
and
being abused.
they have learned that they're supposed to tolerate that in the
Mhm.
name of what? Keeping their covenants,
Yeah.
in the name of honoring their
Yeah.
husband.
I mean, it would be like, if I'm, out of the supermarket and I see some shitty mother begin just slapping her child, just slapping her, and me standing there thinking, wow, that child is so tough. That
Right.
child is so brave that he can just withstand this. What a commendable child. Rather than stepping in and saying, "Woman, stop slapping your child." And this is what Mormons do. They commend these women for being so brave, when what they should do is say, "How dare we have tolerated this?"
So at the conclusion of this story, I love Marianne Eccles.
Yeah,
I can't change anything about her life, but I just feel like what I can do is talk about her in this podcast, but then also just think about her and carry her in my heart for the rest of my life.
yeah,
I
yeah,
can't, and then maybe what I can do so that her suffering isn't for nothing is to talk about her story in such a way to try to help change things
yeah, yeah.
future for, yes, definitely Mormon women, but anybody who finds
Yeah,
themselves in a
yeah.
situation where they feel like they cannot stand up for themselves and that they're helpless in their circumstance and they don't have any power to help
Yeah.
themselves.
I
Uh,
mean, the best that the best, I don't even like phrasing it this way. The best use we can have for these women's suffering is some attempt to prevent it from happening
in the
in
future.
others. These are not they're not heroes to be lauded, they're people to be sympathized with.
It never should have happened.
It never should have happened. So,
Yep. Okay, so this is going to be, the end of this family, right? Like
mhm.
we're going to finish up this series of episodes, the Robinson family. With this episode, we are going to have at least one bonus episode because
Mhm.
Sunstone has not quite put out their episode where they talk about the Robinsons, and I asked, Brian Buchanan, and he gave us permission. We're going to be listening to that Sunstone episode while we're recording, and we're going to get our live reactions to whatever it is that they are
Mhm.
able to find out. But
Mhm.
that episode has not come out yet, and so we'll just tag that on later once that
Mhm.
happens. But this basically is the Robinson story that I wanted to tell. And then next time we'll start with another story, and I'll just leave that as a surprise to listeners, kind of like what we're going to talk about next. But I did want to mention two of Richard Robinson's children because it's interesting enough that I feel like it would it would be sad to overlook, or I don't know, sad's not quite the right word. I feel like these two children need to be talked about very briefly, and it's not
Mhm.
going to take long, but I want to
Mhm.
just mention these two children. The first one I'm going to talk about really fast is his son, Joseph Eldridge Robinson, who is
Mhm.
the only child born to Richard Robinson's third wife, Mary Kate. And I love that we took the time to talk about the manifesto, where the president or the prophet of the Mormon Church in 1890 told everybody we're not practicing polygamy anymore. And then it really was a lie because then in 1904 they had to come back and say, no, really, we have to stop
Yeah.
practicing polygamy now. And then after that is when church leaders themselves kind of turned against each other a little bit, like those in the highest authority. There were a couple of apostles that were excommunicated. I don't know if you knew
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
John Taylor's son, I think his name was, well, his name was John W. Taylor, I think. So John Taylor was, the third prophet of the church, very much a polygamist, said that we will never get rid of polygamy. He was on the run. He was in hiding for much of his presidency of the church because he was a practicing polygamist, and the federal authorities were after him. Wilford Woodruff comes into power, and he says, "Oh, we're not doing that anymore," only they really were. And then by 1904, Joseph Fielding Smith has to come out and say, no, 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 we really aren't doing this anymore, you guys. You got to stop because we are about to get all of our assets seized as a church. The federal government was going to come in and seize all their assets. So we're talking about the years of 1890 through 1904 is the time period after the first manifesto, and then after 1904 is after the second manifesto, excommunicated several apostles and kind of used them as examples to the rest
Mhm.
of the church. Listen, guys, we are serious. We are even excommunicating apostles. It was really kind of silly because all of them were still practicing polygamy. They did find some reasons to kind of publicly out these two guys. Then after that, they were they were no longer willing to like hide people or cover up for people when they continued to practice polygamy. Like the
Mhm.
church more and more and more were kind of like, if you guys are breaking the law, you're on your own, kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Um, and then eventually, like in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, the church started like sending police to arrest polygamists, and the church got really aggressive about
Yeah.
basically, people that continue to practice polygamy. And those people today grew into the different polygamous groups like Warren Jeffs and his
Yeah.
group, the, fundamentalists. There's the
Yeah.
there's the LeBarons who they were murdering people for a while, and there's been lots of documentaries.
Schisms and splinter groups and
Exactly, and a lot of documentaries about these different groups. But all of that started back in 1890 when they said no more, but they weren't really serious. And then in 1904 they said no more. And some people were like, oh, but they're not really serious again. They kept practicing polygamy, and eventually they just had to completely split off from the church.
yeah.
So this is what is fascinating about Richard Robinson's son, only son that he had with his third wife. And I'm going to share my screen and we are going to talk about Joseph Eldridge Robinson. So give me 2 seconds. Let me share this. That is right. All right. Can you see that? Okay, so Joseph Eldridge Robinson. And so the information we need to know about him is, so he was born in 1867. And I always add 20 years to kind of give me an idea of when somebody can start marrying. It's just a general, like, obviously no, but not everybody gets married at the same age, but I see 1867 and I think, okay, 1887 is about marriageable age, kind of a thing. So we scroll down and his first wife, he married in 1891. So, okay, like he's what, 24? Cool. This is after the first manifesto, but whatever, he's just marrying for the very first time, right? He has 4 children with this woman, and just scrolling down, oh, he's married in 1901. Oh, his first wife must have died. So I scroll back up. Nope, she lived till 1953. His first wife was not dead. But he married another woman in 1901. And I'm like, "Ooh, that's bold, right? Like that is a full
Yeah.
11 years after the first manifesto."
Yeah.
Hey, Joseph Eldridge Robinson, who are you? Okay, they had 8 children together. Scrolling down. Oh, wait, he gets married again. Another wife in 1901.
So he marries 2 other women in the same year.
And his first wife is still alive. His second wife is still alive. And here he is marrying another woman in 1901. Okay. All right. So, and then there is enough information for them to list a fourth wife, but they don't actually have a marriage date and no children are listed. But that doesn't mean that they weren't married and there are no children. It's just people aren't confident enough, aren't sure enough to add the information.
Mhm.
I don't actually know why. I don't know anything about this fourth woman, but there is a
Yeah.
fourth woman listed. She does descend. Her name is Eddie Lee, this fourth wife. She does descend from John D. Lee, which I
Wow.
really interesting, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So, okay, so we don't know enough about her. And so when I was looking at this originally, I was like, okay, well, it looks like he has 3 wives. What happened? Like, this is so post First Manifesto. And so marrying these women in 1901, the Second Manifesto is in 1904. And that's the point that the church is like openly
Yeah.
telling
Okay.
people.
So looking at the last wife, we don't know when she was married. Can you scroll down?
Yep.
So she's born in 1885.
Yeah. So
Okay.
quite young.
Which means she's 20-ish in 1905,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So either she got married before then, before the second manifesto,
As a teenager.
or as a teenager,
Yeah.
or by the 1900s, that was much less common.
Yes.
He got married at 20 or later, which means he was after the second manifesto. Well, again, the notion that these manifestos meant anything for polygamy becomes questionable.
Yes. And now it's so in my brain as I'm going through this, I'm like, okay, a lot of people were still practicing polygamy. It was like a wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah. Hmm.
These second two, we don't know about this fourth wife, but the second and third wives, 1901, it was still kind of during that 14 years of wink, wink, nod, nod. But I'm looking, one of them has 6 children, one of them has 8 children, and the second manifesto is only 3 years after he married both of them. So he could not possibly have had all those children within those 3 years. So I'm
Yeah.
putting it together thinking, so okay, maybe he didn't enter into marriage after the second manifesto, but he's having children with these women after the second. So he is fully practicing
Mm,
polygamy
mhm,
after the 1904 second manifesto,
mhm,
that we no longer practice polygamy. And you look at well, we'll scroll back up to the first wife, who he married, just one woman. He married her in 1891. There was nothing illegitimate in regard to like uh, federal law about this marriage. He- a son born in 1892, a daughter born in 1896, a daughter born in 1899, but has a son in 1903 after he's married to these two other women, clearly still having children with this first wife when he's
yeah,
married to the other two.
yeah.
And then you scroll down, the birth years for these children under the second wife: 1902, 1905,
Yeah.
1907, 1909, 1911, 19, we're talking World War I at this point,
Mm.
1915, 1919, 1921. Our grandfather was born at this point. Are you kidding me? What in the world is happening here? And so then you go down to this third wife and look at these six children: 1903, oh 05, oh 06, 11, 16, and then 17.
So the youngest child of his fourth wife.
So his fourth wife, we don't have any information about her children.
Oh, his okay, the youngest child of his third wife died in 2013.
Yes.
Died after we were fully adults.
We were in our 30s.
Well, the only thing I can think of is how, first of all, how little we were told about polygamy growing up, and how when it was talked about, no mention at all was made of how closely our own family is connected to it.
Second, so Joseph Eldred Robinson is the brother of our second great grandfather.
Mhm.
And he had children passing away when we were in our, like, of
In
old
the
age,
30s.
when we were in our 30s.
Ah,
It gets worse. Hold on.
okay.
Okay. So I see all of this and I'm like, this is wild. Like, this is
Yeah.
wild. Like, how in the world was he getting away with, like, he must have gotten excommunicated. He must have just been like, they must have been like the family gossip, the family pariah, like
Yeah.
those Robinsons that were,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. And so like I'm thinking all of this. So of course I have to come look at memories and see what I can find. And I quickly discover that in the 1890s, before he married his polygamous wives, he got to serve in the very first Utah House of Representatives, because Utah
Mhm.
became a state in 1896, and he was in the very first Utah House of Representatives. And I'm thinking,
Mhm.
he's like this prestigious, prominent person. And then he goes on to practice post Second Manifesto polygamy. Like, what is he thinking? Like, he's going to be
Mhm.
completely like kicked out of the church and
Mhm.
ostracized and
Mhm.
excommunicated, just like those apostles are. And then I keep looking through things, and it's not going to tell you automatically just reading these little clips. So I'm going to tell you once we get down here. Okay. So he doesn't get excommunicated.
Yeah.
He gets called to be the mission president in California. Okay. And he is mission president in California for the next 20 years. He is a mission president for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay. He takes one wife with him, the first wife. But the first wife is the one that he only had those four children with.
Mm.
He has 8 children with his second wife and 6 children with his third wife. Um, And so when I had to go back and like I'm I'm putting all these pieces together, right? Um, so yeah, he only has 4 children with this wife, Minnie, and she dies in California. It looks like she lived her life in California, fairly prestigious. Like her husband's this mission president, and it looks like they have some money. I'm not quite sure why. I don't know where really what, because Richard, I don't think he left his children wealthy, So I'm
Mhm.
not really sure where the money comes from. He left some things to them, but it wasn't like money. Out of curiosity, like I have to come through and see where all of these children are born. So I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, his very first child born in Canab, next one born in Pinto, next one born in Canab. So these are all Utah towns. Oh, this next one San Francisco, and that's when I realized, oh, that his dad was already mission president.
Mhm.
By the time he's being born, because his dad was in San Francisco as mission president over
Mhm.
California. You come look at these other children, his second wife, these children, okay, born in Salt Lake City, whereas the next year another child was born in California. And I quickly realized, oh, he's traveling back and forth.
He's traveling back and
He
forth.
has a wife in Salt Lake City. He has a wife in California. Oh, the next child is born in Mexico.
Wow.
Because there were polygamous colonies in
Yeah.
Mexico that didn't stop practicing polygamy when the
Yeah.
government outlawed it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, okay. So he takes this family out of Salt Lake City. And the difference between these two is the second manifesto hadn't happened yet when this first child
Mhm.
is born.
Mhm.
1904, it happens. These men are getting excommunicated. He takes this family down to Mexico. He has 7 more children with this woman. It's not like he's, like, okay, we got to end our relationship. I will provide for you.
Right.
You can find
Yeah.
another husband, kind of a thing. Oh, he keeps on keeping on. Next child born in Mexico. Next child, oh, born back in Utah. So they went back to Utah for a while. Utah, 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 Arizona. So they're kind of moving around a little bit.
Hmm.
This side note, this kiddo is Joseph Eldridge Robinson's youngest child from the second wife, but youngest child, Ralph Brown Robinson. He died in France during
Oh,
World War II. He was killed in action.
wow.
So that's an interesting, I won't take the time to tell the story, but
Sure.
I
Yeah.
read through all of that and it like my heart, like it's just so sad. But yeah, he died in action in France in 1944.
Mhm.
So he was involved in all of that.
Well,
So go ahead.
this makes me wonder whether we have some distant distant relatives who are Mexican citizens who are living, generations in Mexico.
I That is something I've been trying to figure out for a while.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think we do. You know,
Yeah.
we grew up hearing about, oh, those weird polygamous
Yeah.
Mormons that still practice polygamy. They
Yeah.
are so wicked. We are the righteous Mormons. We don't do that anymore.
Right. Well,
I
and we grew up with a lot of hyper American conservatism, which is very xenophobic about Central and South Americans, and we
right?
blame Central and South Americans for, a lot of America's problems.
Yeah.
And we could have blood relatives in Mexico.
Yeah, because this third wife, her children, I think, if I remember correctly, let me look through and see. So Salt Lake City, Mexico,
Hmm. Yeah,
Mexico,
yeah.
back in
And
Utah.
again, none of this was ever mentioned.
No way, are you kidding
And
me?
I can't help but notice the efficacy of refusing or refraining from learning and understanding history, and how refraining from understanding history is what allows people to believe what they prefer to believe.
Yeah, when you don't tell the true details.
Then you can believe whatever you want, and you never have to face up to what actually happened.
Because the obvious question is that I think my brain would have asked if I learned this, say, like as a
Hmm.
teacher.
Yeah.
The obvious question is, I would have said to, our dad or our mom or
Hmm.
whoever was sharing
Hmm.
this, I would
Hmm.
have said, well, Dad, how come he was a mission president if he was
Hmm.
disobeying the law? And
Yeah.
not like
Yeah.
it was like against the church and it was against the law. And but how come the prophet didn't know that he should
Hmm.
be the
Yeah.
mission president?
Yeah.
That's the obvious question.
Hmm.
So rather than allowing, I don't know, kids or anybody to be put in a position where that obvious question would be asked,
Hmm.
They just don't tell the
They
story.
just don't tell the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, um,
Well, this is kind of on par with, learning how how not simple. Yeah, how the isolation, the mental isolation that our parents had and tried to instill in us has no foundation in the facts of the world. So,
it
all
does.
right. Well,
And yeah, right.
that's
Like it's just like
fascinating.
it's fascinating and it kind of makes me giggle because I'm like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
so bizarre.
Yeah.
I just cannot even believe like he was practicing polygamy all the way into the 1920s.
Yeah.
And and in my brain, when I first discovered it, I'm like, man, he must have been like the black sheep or that weird
Hmm.
one that went. No, he
Hmm.
was a
No.
mission president for
Yeah.
all of that time. He died a man that was very revered in the
Hmm.
community. He was in California when he was in San Francisco when the 1905 earthquake happened, the big one that's famous that
Wow.
and there's all this information about, and hey, again, I want to give credit where credit is due. Like, there's information in here about the way that he organized people and helped them and like
Hmm.
helped them through
Yeah.
and did
Yeah.
wonderful things for that community and the Mormon community and then just other people. And he was associating with other like political leaders in the area to try to help people because he had served in the Utah state legislature. And so, like, he
Mhm.
has all this, prominence and this experience, and he's a very capable man and he does all these good things. He had two secret wives living in Mexico at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. No, he was not only a bigamist, he was a trigamist. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
It's just bizarre. And it's like you see these pictures of him and he's just this great man. This,
Dapper, well dressed. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I remember at some point in the past, we were told growing up that polygamy stopped around 1900.
yeah.
And years later, I remember learning, post-Mormon, that really, I mean, they continued to practice polygamy well into the 1920s. And when I learned that, it never occurred to me again that someone who was doing it in the 1920s
Yeah.
was a blood relative of ours.
Yeah. Mhm.
So,
Yeah, this man's children, all those children that I listed, some of them in Mexico, some of them, these are um well, I guess they would be no, these are Geneva's first cousins. So like
mhm,
our grandmother, her mother's first cousins were
mhm.
children of polygamists. Like it's
Yeah,
that close.
yeah.
It's
Wow.
again, it's just more of what we were never told. It's just these
Yeah.
details that are hidden,
Hmm.
and if people stumble upon them, they're like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It just
Well, if they stumble
people
upon them, they do what
brush it
Cousin
off
Dennis
or
did,
yes.
and they whitewash it and they romanticize it and they turn them all into long-suffering heroes.
Yep.
So,
So yeah, so this man traveled around between his wives.
yeah.
He was a politician. He served as a in good standing with the church
Hmm.
mission president for over 20 years in California. All the while, he had secret polygamous
Yeah.
wives planted in different areas that he would.
And if the church leadership didn't know about it,
Did is the thing.
again, well,
How
of
could
course they knew
they
about it. Of
not?
course they knew about it. No, but again, if someone's going to claim that he pulled one over on them, again, where the hell is the power of discernment?
Right. It doesn't exist. That's where. So yeah, so that one I couldn't not share that. It's so
Yeah.
delightfully juicy, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, he's a caricature.
Mhm.
He's a yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he's a cartoon.
Yeah.
It's funny.
It's funny. Like every time I would mention, the one baby that survived from Mary Kate, I would kind of giggle inside and think I can't wait to
Hmm.
tell Nate about it.
Yeah, yeah. About the man he would become.
It's just oh,
Wow.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last thing, and this one is super short.
Okay.
I just think it is so cool that it's like this bright spot in that I kind of don't have an explanation for other than I just think it's so cool. Um, so this daughter Blanche, that is Sarah Blanche Robinson, she is the 11th child of Elizabeth. A really cool thing happened in Canab, Utah, of all places, before women even got the vote.
Hmm.
And that is that on the front page of the main Women's Journal suffrage newspaper, a town run by women. And
Oh.
Canab, Utah was completely run by women in the year 1914. And one of them, let me scroll down to this one, maybe. Let me go. There's another one that lists their names better right here. And one of them is our second great grandfather's sister, Blanche Hamblin.
Hmm.
She married one of the children of the Hamblins. There was Jacob Hamlin, and he had a
Hmm.
brother who lived down there too. I'm not sure which one her husband descends from, but the town board of Canab, Utah. And this is a national women's suffrage newspaper. And they
Hmm.
highlight this little teeny tiny town in Utah. The town board of Canab, Utah consists entirely of women. And
Hmm.
this is before women could vote.
Yeah.
From left to right, Luella McAllister um, is the treasurer. Blanche Hamblin, who's our relative, the sister of our second great grandfather,
Hmm.
Counselor Mary W. Howard Oh, sorry, Mary W. Howard Chamberlain. Oh, she must have two last names. Howard Chamberlain is president, and Tamar Hamblin is the clerk with Ada Siegmiller as counsel. So these five women run this little town of Canab, and I believe it's the first time ever when the entire town council of a town is women, and it was Canab, Utah, and one of
Yeah.
our relatives is on this, town
So
council.
these women were themselves elected.
They were elected.
That's how the town council would have been chosen.
I believe
So that
so.
means that they themselves could not vote,
So no women voted for them,
but they ran for council seats
and the
and they
men
were
of the
elected into the position by men in the town.
that's what seems so weird to me. I'm like, what?
That's
So,
a shocking
oh.
fact.
And to me, when I stumbled upon this, I was like, what a bright spot.
Yeah.
Absolute bright spot in this story to find this beautiful thing that happened, this town
Yeah.
run by women, all women in 1914. Women didn't even have the vote yet.
Well, and even in a town of, fairly politically progressive people, there's always enough bigots who won't vote for a woman just because she's a woman. And for that to not happen 5 times.
Right.
Again, I'm floored by this.
I know. Now there is a beautiful, I don't know, a silver lining to everything that happened with polygamy in Utah. There's a whole history about the suffrage movement in Utah. Women got the vote in Utah long before other people did other places, but
Mhm.
they allowed them, the outsiders, like the government in DC allowed Utah as a territory to
Mhm.
allow women to vote because
Mhm.
they were secretly hoping that women would vote out polygamy.
Yeah.
And I understand, just like what we were talking about, the right thing to do was to allow men to keep their two or three wives
Sure.
after the
Yeah, sure.
manifesto, because what are you going to do? Put these women out on the street? Women that were living in polygamy and had children with their husbands, and they were going to outlaw polygamy, that would harm
Yeah.
themselves if they did that. So it didn't work.
No, no.
And they eventually took the vote away from women before
Hmm.
everybody got it wasn't everybody. Black women did not get the vote, but the rest of the country, white women got the vote in
Hmm.
1920, I think. See, I always forget. It was right around that time. But so there was a history in
Hmm.
Utah of women being able to vote and have Some say politically, whereas that didn't happen other places, did not mean that women were being particularly treated.
No. Yeah.
But because of that, I don't know, that thing that happened in Utah, there was a little bit more
Hmm.
political activity amongst women in Utah because of it.
Yeah.
So I think that definitely influenced this. It wasn't the newest thing ever to happen as
Hmm.
like women being involved in politics, whereas that wasn't happening in other places in the country before, 1919 or whatever.
Hmm.
But it still doesn't change the fact that this little town elected all women for their town.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I couldn't end this thing about the Robinsons without sharing this. It's just too cool. Like I had to.
Yeah. Hmm. No,
So
they're well, and it's good you saved this one for the last,
yeah. And
uh,
on a happy note, right?
because it shows that out of this whole awful, you know, century and a half old culture in the United States, that there are women who were able to eventually kind of stand up to their full height and say, I'm going to make choices for myself. I'm going to make choices for those around me that are good for us.
And I'm gonna go help run the town.
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah.
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 This Blanche, she's the same one that, she moved in to her father's house as a married woman. She moved in for a
Hmm.
while and helped her mother, Elizabeth, until she passed away. And then it sounds like she stayed long enough to kind of help the house keep running. And the
Mm.
question is that would have involved her having to care for Marianne a little bit.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then of course, her father takes Marianne and commits her, and then he passes away like 2
Yeah.
years later. But I just, I don't know. I was like, good for you, Blanche.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
It
Well, no,
made,
for her to come from that background and for her to eventually free herself from that mentality,
yeah.
to say, no, actually, there's no reason for me not to take a leadership role. So, and then to have the bravery to do it, knowing that every vote will be cast by a male hand.
Man. It would be interesting. I wonder if the record still exists to see, who else potentially was running.
Yeah.
Even if no men ran, if they did not want women leading the town, they
Hmm.
would have found a way to put men in those positions.
Oh,
They
yeah, yeah.
they would
Hmm.
have put
Yeah.
men up to the
Yeah, that's
but
right.
but clearly they were comfortable with they got voted in little
Hmm.
Canab, Utah. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's just cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Good note to end on.
yes, I think so too. So that is where we will end on the Robinson story. Like I said, we will come back and do at least one bonus episode and talk
Hmm.
about
Hmm.
whatever Brian Buchanan and Lindsay
Yeah.
discovered about our ancestors that they talked about on Sunstone, a Mormon History podcast. But otherwise, we will jump into another family and
Hmm.
I'll start telling you a different story.
Well, and this one is going to come closer to us by the time we get to the end of it, right? So, yeah, yeah.
And in fact, so I feel, I think because, when we first sat down, and this was before we started recording, when we first sat down today, I kind of was going back and forth between two. I think I do want to start with, we have like four different Smith lines in our family
Hmm.
because, it's a common
Hmm.
name, but, a lot of Smiths. But we're going to be talking about one of our Smith lines, and we're gonna start. Let's see. Actually, I don't know how much I want to explain about that because I just want to tell you.
Yeah,
Um, so we're gonna
let me go in fresh
yes,
at the beginning of next episode.
yes. So we're gonna start with a Smith line, and that is one of our grandparents,
Mm.
and then talking. So it's our grandfather, and we're gonna talk about his family, and then why his family was the way that it was, which of course
Mm.
makes him the way that he was. And
Mhm.
we knew him personally,
Yeah.
visited off and all growing up. And so I'm assuming you don't know a whole lot about his family.
Yeah. I know almost nothing.
Okay.
Um, we interacted with them a bit growing up. I certainly have plenty of memories of him.
Yep.
But the last time I spoke to him was in 2000,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So, yeah, my memories of him are were from when I was a young adult.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
So,
And there really is a several fascinating stories that led to him being him. And it
mhm.
feels as much as Marianne Eccles is just in my heart, and I had to talk about her. This next family that we're going to be talking about, like we knew our grandfather. Like this is so personal, so close to
Yeah,
us.
yeah,
I'm excited because I dove into his family before I had ever heard the term generational trauma.
yeah,
Really was, why is grandpa the way he is?
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's I was just that little bit of curiosity. And when I say deep dive, I'm telling you, I spent years researching this
Mm,
family, and
mm,
I'm excited to share with you. So
mm,
we will do that. We'll jump into that story next time. And I guess just in conclusion, we're grateful for anybody that stuck with us for this
mm,
family story that we've shared over the last several episodes. And we're hoping that you continue to join us as we continue to talk about when I tell you, well, it's our Mormon history, but
mm, mm,
when we continue to talk about our Mormon history, and and again, we're doing this just as a way to start conversation about the importance of telling the whole history
mm,
so that we can identify ways in which individuals in our family experience trauma so that we can understand ourselves better, and hopefully the end goal being that we can help to heal
mm.
ourselves so that we can pass down better things to future generations.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
can't do that if we don't know the truth.
yeah.
We need to talk about the whole story and be willing
Mhm.
to, to not whitewash things, um, so that hopefully we can heal as a species. So,
I agree.
so anyway, okay, perfect. Well, then I will just see you next week and we will
Okay.
jump to you a brand new family.
All right. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
See you soon.
Yep, love it.
Yeah, bye bye.